Peter, I'm going to start the session now. So welcome back everyone, and thank you for joining the panel discussion on natural hazard perspectives in the camps. The panel would be moderated by Professor Peter Salmons, who is the founding director of the Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction, and also he is currently the head of the department. Professor Salmons is a geophysics physicist in practice, and he also the principal investigators of two projects funded by the British Academy and the Royal Society related to the Rohingya refugee crisis. And yes, I would request you, Professor Peter Salmons, to take over and introduce your panelist. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bayer. So just check you can hear me all right, can you?
Yes, Peter.
Okay.
And I can see all the speakers are here.
Excellent. So well, thank you very much for that introduction. So I think we've got a really interesting discussion to be had now on the natural hazards perspectives and a great panel to discuss them. And I think just first of all, I'll start by introducing the panel. Then I'll just sort of say a few words about the Rohingya camps, and then just sort of introduction to how we will run this panel discussion. So let me first of all introduce Professor Maksud Kamal of the Disaster Science and Management Department of Dhaka University, and is also Pro Vice Chancellor Academic of the university. Maksud Kamal is the founder chairman of the Department of Disaster Science and Management and was the Dean of the Faculty of Earth and Environmental Sciences of the university. He joined Dhaka University as a lecturer in 2000 and was promoted to professor in 2010. He received his PhD in engineering geology from Tokyo Institute of Technology. And since then, he has been intensely engaged with classroom teaching, academic research, and development expertise over multiple sectors through consultation and professional service. We have Professor Rashidur Rahman, who is Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering in North South University, Dhaka, Bangladesh. He received his PhD in Computer Science from the University of Calgary, Canada, and Masters from the University of Manitoba in 2007-2003, respectively. He has authored more than 150 peer review papers, journals and conference proceedings in the areas of parallel distributed grid and cloud computing, knowledge and data engineering. His current research interest is data science, data replication on grid, cloud load characterization, optimization of cloud resource placements, computational finance, deep learning, etc. He's been on the editorial board of several journals, and of course has applied his data science expertise to natural hazards. Next, I'd like to introduce Sebastian Kaminski. Sebastian is a structural engineer in Arup's specialist technology and research team. That's the Arup consulting company. His significant expertise in appropriate and sustainable low-cost housing and schools in the developing world, with a focus on low and traditional technologies and materials. He's provided technical support and in-country training courses for post-disaster shelter clusters in Bangladesh, Ecuador, and Nepal. Sebastian is a specialist on the structural use of bamboo, especially for housing, and has been working closely with the NGOs in the Cox's Bazar to improve the strength and durability of the bamboo shelters in the Rohingya refugee camps. Then I'd like to introduce Dr. Akhtar Alam, who's a research fellow in the UCL Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction and an assistant professor on leave from the University of Kashmir. He works on the Resilient Futures for Rohingya Refugees project funded by the Royal Society. His core interest is in spatial science, exploring Earth's surface processes and the interplay of natural and social environment. Furthermore, he's interested to assess the spatio-temporal dynamics of Earth surface systems, integrate qualitative and quantitative data for decision-making, and understand the interplay of natural and social processes. So we have an excellent and well-informed panel in front of us who range from natural hazards through to computational aspects of hazards and looking at vulnerability, but also with a broad overview of the hazards and risks the refugees will face. The refugee camps are, of course, highly susceptible to natural hazards. Rainfall triggered landslides, flash flooding and cyclones. Of course, as we know, the worst cyclones in the Bay of Bengal can have exceptionally high death tolls. So the risk to the refugee population is high, as the camps are predominantly in low-lying areas vulnerable to flash flooding. The surrounding mud hillsides being indiscriminately cut back with no regard to the landslide hazard, and large areas of forest in the hills being cut down to build makeshift shelters, further increasing the risk of landslides. Flooding will increase the risk of waterborne diseases, and landslides will cut road communications and transportation to the camps as well. The overcrowded makeshift huts with poor sanitation, water supplies, and the absence of multi-hazard alert systems and evacuation shelters are likely to increase in disease incidence and demand on existing healthcare facilities. So this is an extremely serious problem that the refugee camps are facing today. And also I say, there's a word for the host population as well, who've taken in the Rohingya refugees, but also face many similar hazards and many similar vulnerabilities. What I'd like to do now is just to say about the panel. So we're going to go through a running order. First for Akhtar Alam, and then moving on to Rashidur Rahman, and then Seb Kaminsky, and ending up with Maksud Kamal. So we'll have sort of integrated view from the hazards through the vulnerabilities and to an overview. Each panelist I'll invite to speak for 6 minutes. We'll keep that quite strict. And then we'll have a break for comments and questions from the audience, a chance to put your points of view. And then we'll come back to the panel again using the same running order for 3 minutes each for the panelists to answer to the audience and make their final comments. And so with that, I would like to call on our first panelist, Akhtar Alam. Please, over to you, Akhtar.
Thank you very much, Professor Peter and Dr. Bass, for the invitation. I would first like to share my slides. Maybe, can you see that?
Yes, that's fine.
Oh, thank you very much. So, I would be talking about what is the likelihood of impacts from the natural hazards on the Rohingya refugees. I mean, given the nature of the region, given the past history of the region, we know that the region can be hit by any of the natural hazards like cyclones, landslides, and flash floods. And given the current, demography of the region, especially with regard to Rohingyas, we know that any extreme event may result in huge life and economic losses. So in a project, any project which aims to look at the Rohingya crisis, I think some dimensions need to be covered and some questions need to be answered. Which are very important to ask to the people, like what led to the exodus of Rohingya, and is the aid-based rehabilitation of Rohingya refugees sustainable? And without the means for better livelihood, what are the chances of refugees being exploited, as have been reported in the past as well? And These are some of the general questions which need to be addressed. And more importantly, how they can be sent back to their native place with an assurance of safe and dignified life. So with regard to our project, which we are working on, one of the projects on Rohingyas, which is actually supported by Royal Society and led by Professor Peter and Dr. Bice, we have some lot of objectives, and with regard to those objectives, we are basically seeking answers for some specific questions, and some of them are: what are the environmental implications of mass influx of Rohingyas? Of course, that's going to impact the environmental quality of the region. And what is the likelihood of conflicts between the refugees and the host community? And what are the possibilities of disease diffusion with the high density refugee camps, as some COVID cases have been also reported? And there is any disease which can transfer may actually can be a very serious issue in the camps. So the most important relevant to this discussion is: what is the probability of Rohingya being affected by the natural hazards like cyclones, landslides, and floods? So as I said, that past events have, when we look at the past, we have observed that the region has been affected by almost all the natural hazards. But I will specifically talk about the cyclone hazard here. So as has been the history of the Bangladesh, that Bangladesh has been actually devastated by the series of cyclones in the past, and we have a lot of statistics available, like it has been reported that cyclone-related deaths have been recorded as more than 1 million uh, since 1877. And in the same way, there have been series of deadly cyclones. And I mean, all of us are aware about the impacts of Cyclone Bola. And given the history of cyclone history of the region, it is very likely that the uh, the Rohingya population living in the makeshift arrangements made up of bamboos and tarpaulin sheets. Of course, that those shelters cannot withstand the severity of the cyclones. They may not necessarily be impacted by the storm surge associated with the cyclones, as has been the uh, I mean, the as has been, as what has happened in the past. I mean, the most of the deaths in cyclone-related deaths in the past have been because of the storm surge. In this case, if given the elevation of the camps, they may not necessarily be affected by the storm surge, but they would definitely be affected by the high intensity winds, and it may result in both human casualties and economic loss as well. And it is going to basically take a toll on them. So this is just a glimpse of what has happened in the past when we talk of the cyclone history of the region. Here is a series of uh, cyclones which which had a landfall in the Cox's Bazar district, and we have many other in the series. These are the details of the cyclone. Since we have a limited time available here, but to make a point, I would like to say that if we see the satellite data, we can just understand how the geometry of the region has changed, especially the land cover, and how the influx of Rohingya refugees is going to be a serious concern in the presence of different natural hazards, especially cyclones. In one of our studies, we have tried to assess what can be the scenario if a landslide, if a cyclone affects the region. So for a district, we have just simulated a cyclone impact scenario for the Cox's Bazar, where we can have different areas, classification of the district into different zones with how they can be affected. Like there are some areas which have the high probability of being affected, and some areas which have the least probability of being affected. Now, specifically talking about the Rohingya refugees, if we look at the demographic setup of the Rohingya refugees, the composition of the population itself is a sort of vulnerable one, and given the exposure of the region, and together with the demographic composition of the Rohingya refugees, it is very likely that they may be affected very badly during any extreme event, especially cyclone. And this is just a one scenario which we have created in one of our studies, how they can be affected. And in our study, we found that the camp number 1E, 1W7, and 13 can be really badly affected given their demographic composition and given the physical environment of these camps. So yeah, and we also tried to correlate our simulation with the observed impacts, where we actually found some good agreement with the simulations and the experiential impacts when we compared the observed impacts of 1993 cyclone. So the point is, with regard to different natural hazards, especially cyclones, a special attention is needed to minimize the losses and to basically increase the resilience of the Rohingya refugees. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much indeed, and obviously we'll come back to that interesting talk in the discussion in a moment. So I'd now like to introduce Rashid Rahman, and I am going to actually play his slides for him, and looking at landslide risk of Rohingya refugee camp. So let me just share my screen. Okay, is that all right? Would you like to start?
Yes, Peter, please start. So I have some network problem here, so it's better from playing from your side. Okay, thank you, Peter.
So please go ahead. Tell me when you want to advance the slide.
Okay, actually, I have recorded there, so you should like share with the computer audio. That will be better, I think. So I can also play from my side if you like. So I can share my screen and play from my side.
Okay, if you want to do that.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, let me do that part then.
Okay.
Okay. I think now you can. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Please let me know if you don't hear the sound. Hello, everyone. Hope all of you are doing well and in good health in this pandemic time with the blessing of Almighty. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Baez and his team, especially Peter Sammers, for inviting me as a speaker in natural hazard perspective for the Rohingya refugee people. And I'm Dr. Muhammad Ashadur Rahman, who is working as a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering in North South University, Dhaka, Bangladesh. First of all, I will introduce the problem of the landslides and some of the reportings that have already given the fact of the landslides that happened to the Rohingya camp infrastructure. As all of you already knew that in the year 2017, more than 7 lakh Rohingya refugees have fled to Bangladesh, and many of them have sought shelter in the camps that are located in the hilly countryside, where landslide risks may be the greatest. A good number of landslide casualties already reported in international media and local media. Muhammad Ali Kobir, who was the divisional forest officer for Cox's South Forest, reported a landslide in July 2018 in one Kutupalung hill camp that demolished at least 5 shelters and damaged 30 lives. He estimated at least 600 settlements were affected and 500 Rohingya people were injured from the landslides across Kutupalung. In July 2019, after 40 inches of rain fell in 72 hours, 26 landslides at Rohingya refugee camps in Cox's Bazar were reported, and this landslide killed one person and left more than 4,500 without shelter. So what are the potential reasons of the landslides? So when the refugee camps were built in the southeastern part of the country, plants and trees were removed and their roots no longer helped to hold the soil in the place. Kutupalong is a hilly area with a fragile soil. It was a deep forest before, but we cut down the trees to make room for the refugees. Refugee camps consisted of rudimentary tarpaulin and bamboo shanties, making them easily vulnerable to monsoon rains. Bangladesh's intense monsoon season increases the danger more. Approximately 80% of the Bangladesh yearly rain falls in just 5 months from June to October, bringing with an increased risk of the landslides. So what are the potential factors for the landslides? As most of the landslide in Bangladesh is rainfall induced, the landslides are dependent on climatic, topographic, and geological factors. And the most common factors that affect the landslides are elevation, slope angle, slope aspect, plane curvature, drainage density, lithology, and density of geologic boundaries, rainfall, and definitely the intensity of the rainfall. Also, some other parameters are related for landslides. Now the question comes how we can deal the landslides. So we can lay concrete slabs along the slope of a hill or mountain. However, this is labor intensive and financially expensive. We could also use real-time data on the land use, rainfall, and elevation. We could get the data from Global Precipitation Measurement, which is known as to be GPM mission of NASA, and we could get also the data from MODIS, which could be got from Terra and Aqua satellites. NASA could help us in the issue of data collection because one of the initiative has been already launched by NASA, which is known as to be Global Landslide Catalog, GLC. And GLC identifies different rainfall triggered landslides around the world. They get the data from media, from disaster database, scientific reports, or other sources and provides it in its open data portal. We could use the data virtualization thing to reduce the landslide impact. For example, we can set different kind of sensors and we can have the data from GLC catalog, different precipitation measurement catalog, and we can integrate them together with respect to data virtualization, and we can measure and track early pre-failure soil movements through those sensors, and we could definitely reduce the landslide risk in this way. Okay. Thank you very much for listening for last few minutes. If you have any question, please let me know.
Thank you very much indeed for a very interesting presentation. So we'll come back to questions in the panel session in a moment. And now I'd like to introduce Sebastian Kaminsky. So Seb, over to you, please.
Hi, Peter. I'm just trying to share my screen. I'm not sure if I'm able to.
Not seeing it yet.
Okay, hang on. Just try that. Oh, is that working now?
That's working.
Great. Let's try this. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk very briefly about natural hazards and shelter design in the Rohingya refugee camps. So I've been working with a number of NGOs in the camps for several years now. So this is based on the work that we've been doing. So very briefly, what should shelter provide? So safe shelter needs to provide many things. Of course, it needs to provide security, privacy, livelihood, living, cooking and eating space. What I'm going to be focusing on, those are incredibly important. What I'm going to be focusing on is just the buildability and the structural aspects. Shelter needs to be easy to construct. It needs to be durable and easy to maintain. It needs to be resistant to natural hazards and affordable. So that's what I'll focus on this presentation. The NGOs there have been looking at shelter from a much more holistic perspective. They've been looking at these other factors These are the non-structural factors, which are equally, if not more important, of course. I just wanted to present the shelter design from a resilience point of view. So firstly, when you talk about shelter, we need to understand what natural hazards and structural issues will affect shelter design. So as I'm sure you all know, in this context, with monsoon, rainfall is very, very heavy. We can get around a meter of rainfall in the summer months. Just for comparison, that red line is where London is. So we have a very large amount of rainfall in this region, which creates risks of flooding and landslides. At the same time, as already mentioned, of course, we've got very high cyclonic risks in that region, which historically have caused a lot of damage. So that creates very large winds, which we need to consider when we look at shelter design. At the same time, in this region, we have insects which will happily eat timber and bamboo, and we've got the risk of rot, which is made worse by the high humidity. So those are all things we need to consider when we look at safe shelter. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the evolution of shelter over time. So this is a photo I took in early 2017. This was part of the old camp in Cox's Bazar. So these refugees had been living there for, I believe, 5 or 10 years or so. So as you can see, they evolved their shelters slightly to make them slightly more permanent. They've moved towards mud brick, mud wall systems, and they've tried to keep their shelters as low as possible to protect against the high cyclonic winds. Now, in the 2016 influx of refugees, these refugees just built shelters with whatever they could. So typically timber, bamboo, plastic sheeting, and rope. That was all they had. So this is a very typical shelter, obviously very, very vulnerable and not really appropriate in any way. And this photo was taken in early 2017. And so just after only a few months of the 2016 influx of refugees, they had cut down the local landscape for firewood and for construction materials because they needed something to build with. So that naturally they needed to use the resources from the land. As you can see, most of the trees all the way up to the horizon have been taken down, and there's a few in the horizon. Since that photo was taken, I would assume, well, the camp's grown, but also I think even more trees have been cut down. So that means that the region is more vulnerable to landslides, as already mentioned, but those trees also provided some protection against wind. So we're in we've got a very vulnerable environment now. So with all this construction, the NGOs in the private sector started to bring in large amounts of bamboo because bamboo was locally available in large quantities. These were floated downriver in very large quantities. And so this became the primary material of choice for construction of these shelters. The NGOs then did a lot of work in developing safer, more durable shelters. They did on-site training for the local communities, and they did training courses for other NGOs. Early 2017, this was the sort of shelter which NGOs were looking towards. It's similar to the informal shelter that we've seen, but a little bit stronger. It uses untreated bamboo, shelter grade plastic sheeting, which is a little bit more durable, and rope. And the aim was to try and make that as safe as possible. From 2018 onwards, actually they had problems sourcing bamboo, and that started to deforest other areas of Bangladesh. And so the NGO started to look at alternatives or mixed use material or shelter that used a mixture of different materials, including reinforced concrete posts. This is one design they came up with, and some NGOs have been building them. A number of NGOs then started setting up bamboo treatment centers, and this protects against insect attack. Doesn't protect against rot, but it does protect against termites and beetles, so that does help. And so now I believe most of the bamboo being used is treated. So that's good. And from 2019 onwards, because the available land in the camps is very limited, NGOs have started to look at 2-story shelters. Now these can become a bit more vulnerable to winds because they're taller, but they make better use of space. So actually they're 1.5 stories because the upper story is only half a story, and it's basically living or sleeping space. So this is a 2-story bamboo shelter that was developed. And now also with the increasing price of bamboo, NGOs looking at lightweight steel shelters as well, in the form of, again, 2-story shelters. This is a concept that's still being explored. All of these shelters are very vulnerable to cyclones. We're trying to make them as resistant as possible. So as time has progressed, they've become more resistant, but we would still categorize them as generally quite vulnerable to, well, definitely to larger cyclones. And you can find out more information in these websites. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And again, we'll come back to questions in a moment. Next, I'd like then to introduce Professor Maxud Kamal, please. Please do go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Peter. Rohingya exodus caused huge natural as well as the social damages of the southeastern part of the country. My presentation will consider the Rohingya relocation to Bhasan Char. Government started relocation of the Rohingya from the Cox's Bazar, different camp of the Rohingyas towards the Bhasan Char. This is a island, offshore island, where government would like to relocate the Rohingyas in Bhasan Char island. Bhasan Char is located around 125 kilometers from the Cox's Bazar in the northeastern part of the Cox's Bazar. And when we are talking about the natural hazard, at the same time, when we are talking about the disaster, that disaster represents not only the natural hazard, it also represents the man-made hazard. And from that viewpoint, United Nations Resolution 2034-32 calls such atrocities of the Myanmar government as a crime against humanity. So when they moved to in a hilly, rugged terrain, that not only caused their exposure to natural hazard, also caused different type of the social environmental hazard they generated in that area. For example, when talking about the environmental impact caused by the Rohingyas that comprise of the deforestation, which estimate the cost estimation of the deforestation is around 5 billion BDT so far. Then another soil erosion and risk of the landslide, which has been mentioned by previous three presenter, and as well as the wildlife habitat loss. Deforestation also caused the net loss of the wildlife habitats as also threat to the biodiversity. And again, the depletion of the groundwater level. Present study of the Department of Geology represent that in and around 20 meter groundwater table drop will be happen by 2022 if the present groundwater obstruction continue. About the landslide, we had our department, that is the Department of Disaster Science and Management. We had a previous study represent that about 25% of the camp area is highly susceptible for critically unstable or landslide. Okay, 25% area is susceptible for the causing of the landslide, and 80% landslide occurred around 40% area of the camp. And when we made the zone of the landslide, it represented nearly unstable area or unstable land, which will be called landslide. There, the inhabitants are around 150,000, critically unstable. In critically unstable area, based on the landslide donation map, there are inhabitants around 23,000, and mostly unstable area, there are 5,394 inhabitants over there. And due to the ecological and environmental hazard and reducing impact of the host communities, commodity prices, wages, local resources, and drug trafficking, etc. Another part of the political decision of the government of Bangladesh took attempt to relocate the Rohingya from Cox's Bazar to Bhasan Chor. And now the question is whether the Bhasan Chor is a stable landmass or it's a stable island or not. Our present investigation from the Department of Disaster Science and Management and from the Department of Geology, we observed that Bhasan Chor it came into surface or it came into emergence back in 2003, and then in course of time the erosional phenomena is the accretional phenomena is much more higher than the erosional phenomena. From 2003 to 2020, approximately 68 square kilometer area has been deposited in and around the Bhasan Chor, and it can be mentioned that the present Bhasan Chor is a relatively stable one, because in the next slide, uh, uh, if we see the shifting of the island depot center, then at present, initially 2003 to 2014, the Bhasan Chor was relatively unstable. Erosion was relatively more than the accretion, and 2014 onwards now, the Chor landmass is relatively stable one, and shifting of the island depot center is almost very close to the central part of the Chor area. The erosional and accretional phenomena revealed that initially back in 2003 to 2009, the erosional phenomena was higher, and from 2014 onward, if you see the gray portion of the of 2018 to 2020, this gray portion is basically the common area which exists onward 2009. That means the Chor area is relatively stable one. The shoreline dynamics reveal that we have four segments of the island: segment A, B, C, and D. Segment A and B, that is the northern part of the island, deposition is relatively higher, and the relatively southeastern part of the island, that is the segment D, the erosion is relatively higher. On the other hand, in segment C, the deposition is higher, where presently the government has developed some shelter over there. Shelter infrastructure at Bhasan Chor, as I mentioned before, the island is presently relatively stable, and Dr. Akhtar Alam mentioned regarding the cyclonic event of the area, but you observe that two previous cyclone which occurred in and around the Bhasan Chor, but the inundation was not that much damaging for the Chor land. And on the other hand, the government has developed a number of embankment where the erosion is higher and where there is a possibility of the occurrence of the inundation if cyclonic event happen. Government constructed near the red area, or the red houses you see here. These are the shelter, and near to the shelter, government constructed 12-kilometer long embankment, which are at present 9 feet higher, and government is planning to raise the embankment around 19 feet higher. Then after the embankment, there is a mangrove forest layer, and later on there is again another layer of having the gravel and geobag barrier. Then there is another layer of the barrier that is the wave breaker has been constructed, and there are 120 cluster houses over there, and in each cluster there is a cyclone shelter, and that cyclone shelter, the plinth level of the cyclone shelter is higher, considering the previous cyclonic phenomena or previous cyclonic height of that area, that is a 6.5 meter higher cyclonic phenomena. And today is very important day for for the government of Bangladesh, because government was trying to relocate the Rohingyas to the Bhasan Char, and there were a number of complaints from different organizations, and today government is in the process of relocation. This morning in Bangladesh time, around 11 a.m., government is in the process of relocating Rohingyas from Cox's Bazar camp area to Bhasan Char, and around 1,000 Rohingya departed from camp area today towards the Bhasan Char. And our study revealed that the Char area is relatively stable one. On the other hand, the Char area is gradually merging towards the inland, that is towards the coast of the Bay of Bengal. This is an offshore island now. It is merging. Sedimentation rate is higher over there. And bathymetric data, now we are processing the bathymetric data, and we found that the sedimentation rate over there is relatively higher, and much more area is coming into emergence to increase the size of the Bhasan Char. So far, this is our study. We are studying more regarding the freshwater resources of the area, regarding the aquifer system, and regarding the other resources of the Bhasan Char area where Rohingyas are at present relocated by the government of Bangladesh. Thank you for hearing. If you have any question, please let me ask. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for all our panelists. What I'd like you to do is to write your questions in the questions and answers. That's the Q&A, and I will read them out, and then I'll put them to the panel, and the panelists can pick them up. So a question for Professor Kamal. Considering your research in Bhasan Char, is it a safe place for refugees? Is it more safe considering the risk of disasters, cyclones and natural hazards than their current situation, Cox's Bazar? Thank you. So that's a very pertinent question. I think Max and Kamal can answer that first of all, but I'd also open it up to the rest of the panel as well.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Max and Kamal.
Myself, Peter?
You go first, and then I'll see if anybody else wants to join, but please go first.
Okay, thank you. Considering the present situation of the Rohingyas in the rugged hilly terrain, we came to know, and we are working over there because the natural resources are in threat, and there is a social conflict between the host community and the Rohingyas. And also around one paper mentioned that around 1,440 landslide occurred so far in the Rohingya camp areas. So considering many things, government relocating the Rohingyas to the Bhasan Char, in our study it revealed that the Char area is stable, as I mentioned before. Stability in terms of the geological aspect. When we are talking about a stable island, it means whether accretion is higher to respect of the erosion. If we consider from 2014 till now, then we see the erosion is much more higher than the accretion in one hand. On the other hand, the common Char area onwards 2014 till day is unique one. That is the common Char area in 2014, 2015, 16, 17, until now, we have seen the same Char area where there is no erosion or accretion. But accretion is going on the northern part of the Char area. And this northern part, again, it's the inland side of the Bhasan Char. That's why I mentioned that in near future, maybe the Char will merge to the mainland mass of the Bangladesh. So from that viewpoint, Char area, this Bhasan Char area is a stable one. Government, beside this, government took number of measures, as I mentioned before, that cyclone shelter is over there. So government constructed new hospital and having 20 bed new hospital. The Char area government has developed shelter for around 100,000 Rohingyas. And the shelter area, shelter actually, really, this is the unique one, having the wash system very good. They will have the opportunity for education, for playing, and etc. and etc. And if there is any cyclone, big cyclone like 1970, so if the third side is over, for example, 7 or more than, or 6.5, then there is a possibility for the inundation. In that case, is construction of the cyclone shelters centering all the cluster. There is 120 clusters over there, and for 120 cluster, 120 cyclone shelter has been constructed. So in one hand, we see the physical stability of the island. On the other hand, government took number of measures to protect the Rohingyas if there are any cyclonic events, or there are another sort of natural disaster like tsunami and etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, while we're waiting for more questions to appear in the chat, I thought I'd actually just now put that over to Sebastian Kaminsky, because obviously on the one hand, the hazard is one part of the risk, but the vulnerability is another part of the risk. So, I mean, are you in a position, do you think, to compare maybe the vulnerability of the Rohingya, in their camps, maybe under their bamboo shelters, compared to what might happen if they are evacuated to Basin Shah? So, Seb, do you have a comment on that?
Hi, Peter. I can't comment on Basin Shah, unfortunately. I can just comment on the camps that we've seen. The NGOs there have tried to make the shelters as resilient as possible using what limited materials they have available, and also take into account the restrictions that are in place in terms of what materials they can use. But unfortunately, those shelters remain, their capacity is significantly below the demands from a large cyclone. But unfortunately, I can't comment on Basin Shah.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question in the chat now from Lena Dominelli, who's asked, why has the international community played such a poor role in supporting the Rohingya? It seems that one poor country with many demands on its limited resources are left to deal with some very complex issues. While I applaud the generosity of the Bangladesh's response, the silence of the global community is overwhelming, and this is true to many other issues in fleeing armed conflict. There's also now silence about this issue on the topic in the media. What can researchers do to engage policymakers in actually solving such problems at the international level and showing solidarity to do so? I just wonder, maybe Rashid Rahman, I mean, if you can pick up on this. I mean, you are an international researcher. Is there international research engaged with you on these aspects, for instance, of the landslide vulnerability in the Rohingya camps?
Yes, thank you, Peter. Actually, I am being a computer scientist and mainly working on the data science perspective. Yes, there is definitely this is a new area of interdisciplinary research because that like the remote sensing data is not always adequate to predict the landslide or the risks of the landslide, because the sensor data mainly focus on the data of the top level, not in the ground level. So in the ground level data, we should depend on different kind of sensor, and like the MODIS data or like any satellite data are more structured, where the like the data that we get from the sensor are very dynamic and they are generally semi-structured. So in that case, you have to merge this kind of structured and non-structured data, and the sensor data are not coming like on a regular basis, maybe on a day basis or maybe in a weekly basis, sometimes like that. Whereas sensor data are very dynamic in nature. You have like bunch of data, so you can accumulate together those kind of thing, and you have to make the analysis with a very fast manner that can be done only on the cloud computing or maybe the fog computing area. So here I see that if emerging from different interdisciplinary people could be made, then definitely we can give less like good accuracy in our prediction, and also we can be less vulnerable with respect to landslide risks and so on. And recently, myself and Dr. Bias worked on the landslide sustainability mapping on the whole like Cox's district. Though I have worked with some of my like students on the Rohingya camp infrastructures, landslide risks prediction, but recently we have incorporated much more remote sense data and much more machine learning techniques we have incorporated, so that our prediction accuracy becomes to be like more. So I think yes, there is definitely many people around, statistician, like computer scientists, as well as remote sensing people and disaster risk management people can work together to make a better prediction system that will work better. So that is my understanding.
Well, thank you very much. Just want to ask Akhtar Alam now about the cyclone risk. And obviously you talked about the various risk components, but what can be done to reduce the vulnerability to cyclone risk in the Rohingya camps?
Thank you, Professor Peter. I'm sorry, I basically lost internet connection for some time. So with regard to actually cyclones, we have, I mean, limited choice in the sense that we cannot, like like in case of landslides, we cannot stop cyclones from occurring, but we can definitely take some initiatives to basically minimize the impacts. And the first thing which comes to my mind is, and given the history of losses in Bangladesh, we have observed that most of the losses have been because of the storm surge associated with the cyclones, especially when we talk of the human casualties. So whenever we intend to just develop some camp, we had to keep this in mind. What is the elevation of the area to at least minimize the probability of the camp being inundated during a storm surge. That's one. Number two is that we had to ultimately basically decentralize this density of the refugees, because this is one thing which makes them more vulnerable. And in addition to that, given the structures in which they are living, they are not, of course, those structures, those temporary shelters cannot withstand the severity of the cyclones. So some improvement is needed in that context as well. So one, we had to choose a location very intelligent. I mean, make a very good choice while we choose a location for developing a camp. Second, we have to also think what type of shelters can actually at least resist to some extent the severity of the cyclones.
Okay, thank you very much. And actually sort of worth, I think, putting that point back to Seb Kaminsky. And obviously you talked about bamboo shelters. You talked about how there started to be some steel structured shelters. How do you see this evolving in time and affecting the vulnerability of the Rohingya?
So good question. I think a lot of it depends on money and also what materials can be used in the camps. There's currently restrictions on what materials can be used and the permanence of those materials. So I think that's something which needs to be looked at. And if it's possible to start building with more permanent materials such as reinforced concrete, then one would be able to construct more resilient shelters. We do have a very large number of refugees there, so that would involve a large number of cyclone resistant shelters. So certainly not impossible, but a big task to do, and there's a lot of cost, of course, involved.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got another question in the chat which says, what is the long-term effect of shifting Rohingyas at Bhasan Char? Is there any impact over the repatriation program? It's, I guess, probably quite a political question. Would anybody like to tackle this? Maqsood Kamal, maybe?
Yeah, Peter, thank you. You mentioned that this is a very political issues, and it depends on the agreement of the both government. And Bangladesh government is asking Myanmar government long time to bring back their people there in Myanmar, but we don't see any willingness. We don't see any sort of good willingness of the government of Myanmar to bring back. So the option what government of Bangladesh had right now, that is, the local people is thinking that they're being minority over there, because 1 million Rohingya people is there, but the local community or local people are, in terms of the number, they are lower. In terms of the resources, now there are a lot of problem over there. So this is a decision of the government to bring the people to Bhasanchar Rohingyas. But as you mentioned, that this is totally a political decision when both government will came into agreement, then it will not be any problem, or it won't have any impact to bring the Rohingya people to Bhasanchar. It will not play any impact when the political decision will come into the place to bring back to the Rohingyas to their own country.
Thank you very much. We've actually only got 5 minutes to go before we have the break. Oh, sorry, before we have the next session. So I just want to ask the panel to conclude, and maybe just starting with Akhtar Alam. Akhtar, do you want to have some final words?
Yeah, of course. I would specifically talk with regard to the cyclones, since I have some little knowledge of the cyclones in the Bangladesh. So I think while looking at the Rohingya crisis, I think the biggest problem or the biggest concern has to be especially when we talk about the natural hazards, has to be the cyclones, because uh, they can be really very deadly, and given the location of the Rohingya refugees and the camps, that can really turn into disaster. So specific concern and specific attention has to be there to basically minimize the likely impacts of cyclones, and just look for the various possibilities to increase the resilience of the uh, refugees, especially with regard to cyclones. Actually, I see that a very big issue there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Rashid Rahman, do you have a last thought, just in 1 minute?
Yes, I can like say about two kind of like thinking that could be made on the top of the presentation that I have given. So one is the like we can develop a reliable landslide susceptibility map known as to be like LSM, which could be helpful, and different kind of spatial and temporal frequency of the landslide could be contributed to the landslide inventory with the data as much as complete in the both space and time. And in this place, the landslide susceptibility mapping, different kind of data mining and machine learning algorithms could play a role for this part, LSM. And one part that I have, when I saw different kind of landslide risk mapping, I have seen that there are many labs, there are kind of hazard simulation that could be done with respect to Bangladesh different like departments or maybe different organization. And I saw that in the hazard simulation, the scientists are generally performing like humidity and temperature controlled room that are piled with the rock or the soil samples that we could get from the Rohingya camp landslide and risk areas. And in those labs, the scientists or maybe the civil engineers could subject the rock or the soil to stringent different type of tests, applying different kind of scenarios such as the intensity and the duration of the rainfall and different kind of seismic data, and they can like develop some kind of like infrastructure, or maybe what kind of infrastructure can like hold this kind of like stringent test and pass kind stringent test, and we can build different kind of bamboo structure or maybe some other like steel structure that can pass this kind of test. So I think this way we can think about, and the research could be done in this area that can definitely help like our Rohingya people there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seb Kaminsky, one last thought?
Yes, I'd just like to echo the comments that have been said about the importance of designing for cyclones. I think that's certainly one of the highest hazards in the camps. And I think we just need to keep thinking of strategies to mitigate that risk, or at least reduce it as much as possible. Small things, even like planting trees, may help. That can help a little bit, but I think we also need to keep looking at how we can improve the resilience of the shelters themselves, and hopefully over time that will improve.
Thank you. And a final word from Maksud Kamal.
Thank you, Peter. So far, we observe the most damaging hazard over there is could be the landslide. So the early warning system of the landslide, one is the community-based early warning, another early warning system for the decision maker, that is the GIS-based early warning, could be the option for the safety of the people of the camp. This is one thing. Another thing, actually, the solution depends on the political willingness of the Myanmar government. If Myanmar government just obey, or Myanmar government pay respect to the international call to bring back their people to Myanmar, then solution that would be the only solution to solve this humanitarian crisis. So from my end, I am also requesting or asking Myanmar government to pay honor to the international call to bring the Rohingyas people to their country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a very good note to end this discussion on. Obviously, we've talked about the hazards, we've talked about some of the mitigations and many positive ideas. And of course, we have to talk about the long-term political issues as well. So I wish to thank my panelists very much for a really interesting and illuminating discussion. Thank you very much. And back to Bias now.
Thank you, Professor Peter Salmons. And yes, and thanks to all the speakers, Professor Kamal, Professor Rashid, Dr. Akhtar, and Seb, for your interesting and thought-provoking presentations and talks. Now I would like to invite Dr. Qazi Fahmida Farzana to moderate the session on Rohingya case studies from Bangladesh, India, Malaysia, and Saudi Arabia. Dr. Farzana works as an assistant professor in international relations at the University of Sharjah, UAE. Her interest includes nationalism, ethnic conflict, diplomacy, forced displacement, and statelessness, with an emphasis on South and Southeast Asia. She has been working on Rohingya crisis. It's been over 10 years, and she is also funded by the British Academy. She has extensively published articles, books, and book chapters, and influential policy briefs on the Rohingya crisis. Now, I would like to request Dr. Farzana to take over the next 1 hour.
Thank you very much, Bias. Thank you for your kind words. So the panelists, are you here? May I request you to switch on,
Yes,
So-
Farzana, we are here.
Okay, wonderful. Nice to hear from you, Ashiria. So I would like to start by welcoming our presenters and those who are attending the session. This panel would bring the case studies, the Rohingya case from different countries. And as you know, over the decades, we have seen the Rohingya ethnic minority from the Rakhine state of Myanmar were driven out from their country of origin. And the diaspora spread out and sheltered in many different parts of the world, including Bangladesh, India, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, for the sake of security and survival and trying to make a decent future to their lives. Many of these refugees, those who fled to other countries from Myanmar, many of them were children. Some have been granted citizenship. A small number of them granted citizenship, and others got asylums or got refugee status. while others live in shadows without any documentation. They are illegal, and they are undocumented Rohingya refugees in many different countries. Some have ended in detention centers like in Malaysia. Some are in prison. Some perished during their desperate journey to countries like Malaysia and other parts of the world. So currently the Rohingya diaspora is present in Asia, in Europe, in North America and Australia. And in today's panel, we are very honored to have these three distinguished panelists. They will present the Rohingya case from 3 different countries. We have Dr. Murad, he will be presenting on Rohingya's case in Saudi Arabia. We have Dr. Shreya Pandit from India. We have Dr. Siddiqui from Bangladesh. And at the end, I will make a presentation on Rohingya case in Malaysia. So each of us will have 10 to 12 minutes, followed by 10 minutes Q&A. And without further ado, I would like to introduce the first presenter, Dr. Murad Al-Sahafi. He has a PhD from Auckland University of Auckland, New Zealand. He is currently an associate professor of applied linguistics in the Department of Modern Languages and Literature at King Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia. His current research focuses on issues related to heritage, community languages in Saudi Arabia. So he will be presenting the case of Rohingya in Saudi Arabia. So without further ado, it's all, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Farzana. I'm just honored to share my presentation file. So, assalamu alaikum. Greetings to you all from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I'm happy to be part of this virtual conference, and I would like to thank the conference organizers, moderators, speakers, and participants for these opportunities. Now, as Dr. Kazi mentioned, various Rohingya-speaking Muslim communities have established themselves outside of Myanmar, and in this connection, Saudi Arabia has a long history of hosting Muslim Rohingya refugees. This favor aims to bring attention to the Rohingya refugee in Saudi Arabia, and the goal here is twofold. Firstly, to provide an overview of the socio-historical background of the Rohingya refugee community, and secondly, to outline some of the findings of my recent research on the socio-linguistic dynamics amongst generations of Rohingya refugees in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a multiculturally diverse country with immigrants, foreign workers, and visitors from all over the world. And as you can see from the table, which shows the population counts of Saudi Arabia by nationality. So we have Saudi versus non-Saudi nationals from the 2018 census. The census counted a total of 33.4 million individuals living in Saudi Arabia. And as can be seen, 20.8 million are Saudi nationals and 12.6 million are foreigners. The city of Mecca, where most Rohingya refugees reside, has a population of about 1.6 million. Of these, 45% are foreigners, making the city of Mecca one of the most multilingual and multicultural city in the country. Rohingya Arakanese Muslim refugees in Saudi Arabia came from the northwest Rakhine state of Myanmar, known as Arakan, Burma, before 1989. According to the sheikh or leader of the community here in Saudi Arabia, Rohingya's migration to Saudi Arabia occurred in 4 phases between 1948 and 1971. According to the leader of the community, Rohingya have been forced to flee their country due to the injustice and torture against Muslims at the hands of their former governments and various Buddhist extremist groups. In terms of their number, their population, no official census data existed for the Rohingya refugees in Saudi Arabia, and their number is estimated by the leader at around 400,000. Of these, 250,000 are documented with appropriate residence permits. In 2013, the Saudi government established the Standing Committee for Residency Status Correction of the Burmese community, as many of them did not have appropriate residence and work permits. The correction process covered many areas of the community, including residency, health, and educational status. The committee's final report, submitted in 2017, so after 4 years, indicated that fee-free residency permits were granted to about 250,000 Burmese refugees. And in addition, the status of 121 charitable Rohingya community schools was corrected, and a total of 62,650 Burmese students merged into Saudi public school at the primary, intermediate, and secondary level. Furthermore, about 1,300 university scholarships for outstanding students were granted to the Burmese student. In this photo, you can see members of the Burmese community during the correction process back in 2013. And here you can see Makkah Governor Prince Khalid Faisal delivering the first residence permit, or igama as we call it here, to a Burmese refugee during a ceremony held in Mecca back in 2013. This table shows documented Rohingya population by city of residence in Saudi Arabia. As can be seen from the table, the city of Makkah al-Mukarramah has long been overwhelmingly favored by Rohingya refugee resettlement, drawing approximately 77% of the Rohingya population in Saudi Arabia. There are also Rohingya communities in other cities, mainly in the western region of the country, including Jeddah with about 44,000, and in Medina and Munawwara with about 9,600 Rohingya refugees. Rohingya refugees are concentrated in specific districts, forming what has become known locally as Burmawi neighborhoods. Now, Burmawi is the Arabic word for Burmese. The office of the representative of the Burmese community is located in Mecca, and this office looks after Burmese refugees' interests and also cooperate with various government departments. Although the Rohingya communities have mainly lived in unplanned and low-income neighborhoods, they have generally been very successful in forming well-organized and connected ethnic communities. Burmese neighborhoods are served by their own locally established councils, which look after the residents' interest. Generally speaking, the socioeconomic status of the Rohingya is below average. Jobs that require manpower, position in mosque, those of imams or muezzins or Quran teachers, or in the fields of carpentry, blacksmithing, and upholstery represent chief sources of their livelihood. Now, we will have a quick look at the socio-linguistic situation of the Rohingya language as being one of the minority languages spoken in Saudi Arabia. But now in language contact situation, the maintenance of the heritage language, which is one of the most obvious marker of the ethnic and cultural identity, often becomes a major challenge faced by minority language groups in the host country. The term language maintenance here refers to a situation whereby members of a minority community continue to use their language in a number of domains despite competition with the majority language in the host country. On the other hand, language shift, if you like, represent the other side of the coin, which often refers to a gradual decline in terms of the minority language proficiency, as well as its competent usage in different domains. Generally, previous research has found that language shift typically over 3 generations to be more common than language maintenance. I will now provide a summary of 2 studies which have investigated the situation of the Rohingya refugee language in the Saudi context. The first study investigated patterns of bilingual language proficiency and usage among 98 second and third generation Rohingya refugees living in Mecca. Data were collected by using bilingual language proficiency and language usage survey. Findings demonstrate that the respondents from both generational groups reported a good level of Rohingya oral skills and Arabic oral and written skills, which is a departure from the typical patterns of language shift over 3 generations. Arabic seems to dominate the public, the media, and the religious domains, while Rohingya is widely used in the home and ethnic community among the Rohingyas. The second study conducted in this year, 2020, explored the language attitudes of 65 second-generation Rohingya refugees towards both Rohingya, the minority language, and Arabic as the majority language. Data were collected in Jeddah by using language attitudes questionnaire and focus group discussions. Overall, the participants held positive attitudes of both Rohingya language and the Arabic language, and their positive views of Arabic seem to fulfill their social and religious needs in order to integrate in their Arabic dominant environment, and also to gain access to the Quran and also to the teaching of Islam in their Arabic speaking Muslim host country. The participants also showed positive attitudes towards Rohingya in terms of its use in the home and ethnic community, which represent 2 crucial domains for the reproduction of the Rohingya language and also the transmission of the language from one generation to the next. In addition, they reported positive attitudes of Rohingya due to its connection to their ethnic identity. Now, the most important factors that seem to encourage Rohingya language preservation and transmission include the large number of Rohingya refugees living closely together, in particular their geographical concentration in certain ethnic neighborhoods that provide exposure to the Rohingya language and usage opportunities. Secondly, habitual language use of the Rohingya in the home and ethnic community. Thirdly, the importance of both Rohingya and Arabic for the Rohingya ethnic and religious identity. Rohingya ethnic community connectedness, and clearly the Rohingya have successfully created their own co-ethnic and co-linguistic networks, daily activities, and patterns of living in their neighborhoods. And finally, this concludes with this quotation from one of my study participants who emphasized that we are Burmese Rohingyas, our native language is Rohingya, and our homeland is Arakan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Morad. We get an insight about the diaspora in Saudi Arabia, and particularly the changes the young second and third generation refugees are going through. It's interesting to hear. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce our second presenter, Dr. Aishwarya Pandit. She is an associate professor at Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University. She finished her PhD at the University of Cambridge in 2015. She works on post-partition Muslim politics in Uttar Pradesh, India. So Aishwarya, this all yours. You can start. Thanks.
Hi, good evening, everybody. It's just that thank you for having me on this session. And thank you for bearing with me, knowing I have some medical issues. So I'm going to be presenting the documentary that I made. I am the concept creator, writer for that documentary. That was born out of curiosity in 2017 with respect to the Rohingyas in India, because at that point in time, a large number of reports were flooding the Indian newspapers with respect to the Rohingya crisis and how it's a major crisis and it's a national security threat, which coincided with a lot of the anti-Muslim kind of plank that the Hindu right was using to kind of further push the Muslim community towards marginalization. This is born out of that curiosity. I'll be playing some portion of the documentary. It's available online as well. Without wasting much time, I'll just share my screen with respect to the documentary. Thank you. Is it visible? Can everyone see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Kalindi Kunj, New Delhi. Not far from the banks of the river Yamuna, one comes across this camp. At first sight, not amongst the best places to visit in Delhi. Makeshift structures surrounded by garbage, flies, muddy pools greet you. But within this filth lives a community. People who have witnessed even worse. Rohingyas, the worst hit community in the world in recent times. They come from the Rakhine state in Myanmar. 28th May 2012. 3 Rohingya men allegedly rape and murder a Buddhist woman. What followed shook the world. Merciless riots, bloodshed led to hundreds being killed, thousands of houses getting burnt, and lakhs getting displaced from Myanmar. And the state leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, a Nobel Peace Prize winner being in regime, didn't do much. Her government giving a free hand to the army made it worse for the community. Leaving behind stories of death, destruction, torture, and separation. These people fled to Bangladesh, the next safest option. But Bangladesh too did not accept them as citizens, and they were forced to live in small camps as refugees. Most countries closed their doors to the Rohingyas. The Rohingyas initially tried moving to Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, but to no avail. Then began a steady passage to safety. Over the last 8 years, nearly 40,000 Rohingyas have taken refuge in India. They moved into India from this part known as the India-Myanmar-Bangladesh Tri-Junction. They fled violence and persecution back home in Myanmar, then faced harassment in Bangladesh, their first port of call after the escape. Hence, they made that transnational shift to India for shelter. Historically, India has provided home to several refugees in the past. As per official figures, about 94,000 Tibetan refugees, 30 lakh Bangladeshi migrants, 1,70,000 Tamilian migrants, 11,000 Afghan refugees, and about 1 lakh Chakma and Hajong refugees have found homes in the country. Rohingyas gradually settled in states like Haryana, Jammu, UP, Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, Kerala. Rehana Begum, a mother of 4, has been living in this Delhi camp since 2015. Her abusive husband abandoned her soon after arrival, and this shanty that she had called home was destroyed in a fire a few months ago.
जो मुसलमान है सबको भी ऐसे जुल्म कर रहे हैं जवान जवान लड़के लग जा रहे हैं फिर इसका वजह से हम आ गए तब उधर से बेइज्जत हो रहा है बुद्धिस्ट ले जा रहे हैं इसका वजह से हमारा बहन के साथ हम आ गया
A sizable Rohingya population has settled in New Delhi in these shanties built on the land belonging to the Zakat Foundation, a local Muslim charitable trust. They faced resistance from the civil society and political groups, but they got some relief from the Supreme Court and the National Human Rights Commission of India. They will not be evicted till the hearing in court is completed.
Rohingya migration in India has been a very tough journey. From the government point of view, there are two aspects to this problem. While it sees them as agents of terrorism, on the other hand, it has to struggle with its own problems of a growing population and a changing demography.
I mean, the biggest issue for the Rohingya here is obviously legal recognition and the protection that comes with that recognition. I think they are considered a difficult refugee community in this country, a politically contentious one, partly because of the broader history that India has of recognizing or not recognizing certain refugee groups and wanting to keep those numbers to a minimum, not wanting to be obligated to provide those levels of protection at a state level. And the Rohingya at the moment have, over the last year, have been exiting Myanmar in significant numbers. There's the concern, not to increase the number here, especially in different states within India. So there's a demographic concern there. There's a kind of identity concern there with them being a Muslim population and the kind of politics that come depending on where they stay in states like Jammu, for example. So there are a variety of different layers to the concern that India has over the Rohingya population here.
One of the reasons Rohingyas are being seen as a difficult community is due to the Bangladeshi experience. Back in the 1970s, Bangladeshi refugees started migrating to Assam in large numbers. This created issues for the local community, which feared they would be in minority soon. This feeling gave birth to agitation by All Assam Students' Union. Reeling under pressure, the then Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, had to sign the Assam Accord of 1985. Later, AASU leader Sarbanand Sonowal moved the Supreme Court that the Accord provisions were not implemented properly. The Supreme Court verdict led to National Register for Citizenship. Sonowal is currently Chief Minister of Assam. But for many of these Rohingyas, especially the women, existence itself has been a huge struggle. No one knows this better than Sitara Begum, Rehana's younger sister. It only compounds her insecurity, heightened by the constant threat of rape and abuse back home in Myanmar. Rehana wants her sister to get married, which she believes will bring the much needed stability.
उठा कर ले जाता है पता नहीं कहाँ ले जाता है वहाँ पे क्या मार दिया क्या कहाँ ले जेल गया क्या कहाँ भेज दिया मालूम नहीं लेकिन ले जाती है और वापस नहीं आते तो ऐसे गांव में कोई ऐसे करते हैं यहाँ पे मम्मी पापा ऐसे बांध के रख देता है लड़की को ऐसे जुल्म करता है मम्मी पापा के सामने.
The Rohingya community, which is a conservative Muslim community for the most part, the women, tend to occupy the private space more than the public space. And with the low level of skill and low level of education among the women, there are fewer opportunities, social and economic opportunities for women to get out and interact and integrate in other spheres.
Cheap mobile phone data services in India have provided some succor to them. A call or communication through video calls allows them to inquire about their relatives left back home. They also use other mobile applications to communicate with their loved ones. There are some other small things lighting up the lives of these hapless people, like their staple food of fish and rice. When a vendor arrives, they clamor around him and haggle to get the best bargain. There's a similar bustle when a chicken seller visits the camp. They're also lucky to get some medical help, courtesy the doctors of the nearby Holy Family Hospital. The doctor visits the camp and gives free medical checkup and medicines. Such outbursts of anger make them feel unwelcome, a sentiment echoed by some people and even India's former Home Minister. This brings more turbulence in the lives of the Rohingyas.
मैं यह मानता हूं कि भारत के अंदर जो भी रिसोर्सेज हैं, इन रिसोर्सेज पर हर भारतीय का एक पहला हक है। इसलिए हर भारतीय को इस ह्यूमन राइट्स का संरक्षण करना अपना पहला कर्तव्य मानना चाहिए। कई बार हम पर ऐसी चीजों को बढ़ावा दिया।
We have to cut short. How many minutes there for the topic?
दोनों ही खतरे में पड़ने का अंदेशा पैदा हो जाता है। दूसरों के मानवाधिकारों की चिंता करने।
We still have long time. Yeah.
I'm stopping.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. It's already 12 minutes. More than 12, 13, 14 minutes already. So, do you want to say anything before we move on to another panelist?
I would just like to say that please have a look at the entire documentary. It's available online. It will give an insight to the whole problem, whereas India Rohingya issue is concerned. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we need to move to the second presenter. We have Dr. Bulbul Siddiqui. He's an associate professor in anthropology and sociology at the Department of Political Science and Sociology at North-South University in Bangladesh. He is also the director of Confucius Institute at North-South University. Dr. Siddiqui completed his doctoral research from Cardiff University in the UK in anthropology in 2014. And he will be presenting the Rohingya case in Bangladesh. So, Dr. Siddiqui, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farzana. So, you can hear me, right?
Yes, loud and clear. Wonderful. Carry on.
Thank you. So, let me share my screen first. Okay, so the title of my presentation is The Myth Within Quote of Repatriation and the Prolonged Sufferings of the Rohingya in Bangladesh. And I will briefly talk about the problems of repatriation and also in the past times and also in the future what we have in the future based on our previous experience, what we can see so far. So before I go in there, so I'll just add a few words about my experience when I first went to a camp right after Exodus, not right after, like after 2017 Exodus in Bangladesh. And like when I moved in there, like it was a sunny, hot day, and when I reached to Kia, Cox's and I've noticed that the camp is built on a hill area, and I'm just giving you just to have my first reaction to the whole scenario. What was my first reaction as a researcher during that time? So it was came to a shock to me for various reasons. like seeing all this huge population gathering and living into that tiny little hilly space. And when I entered into the camps, it was congested and things were not very, livable at the beginning. And later on, with the initiative of the government of Bangladesh and also various national and international organizations, we managed to develop a very good, not in terms of, and sorry, it's distracting me. I'm sorry. It managed to give a space for the huge number of Rohingya population in our country. And as you know that when I saw another thing that came and struck into my mind, that is like when I looked at their eyes, looked at their face, they looked very tired, pale and anxious, and they do not know what would be their future I'm talking about sometimes in 2018. And then they had to leave their country and move into Bangladesh for and secured refuge. And it's just because of saving their life. And after all these 3 years, and the things of being the whole issues of their repatriation and dignified repatriation and sustainable solution, we're still waiting for the a sustainable solution in that perspective. This is a little background. I'm not going into that because we already know about the numbers, and it's a historical crisis that started in like nearly 4 decades back. And later on, we've seen like before 2017, there was issues like risk of human trafficking in various registered and unregistered camp, and there were gender-based violence, health problems, and which already affecting the well-being and health of most of the population they're living in human condition. So 2017, the influx in 2017 made it more, more complex and more problematic for the lives of the Rohingya population in Bangladesh. So these are the positions that or some of the key points that government of Bangladesh they're taking or focusing on while dealing with the Rohingyas. First point is voluntary and dignified repatriation, and not approving the idea of local integration. And if you look into the quote from the Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina that she mentioned in 75th UNGA, the problem was created by Myanmar, and its solution must be found in Myanmar. I request the international community to play a more effective role for a solution to the crisis, unquote. And if you look into the Minister of Foreign Affairs webpage, and you can get this quote, blaming and accusing Bangladesh for non-cooperation in repatriation is baseless, ill-motivated, and totally unacceptable. That is another official version position of Bangladesh. So if we look into now the cases of repatriation from the previous cases and also global perspective, we can see that generally refugee issues has been seen as a burden for the host community and society. And in many cases, it has to be seen as case-by-case basis, because all the repatriation model may not be applicable for the solution for all countries' cases. And we can see it in Rohingya cases in our country, in Bangladesh. And another point that raised that if we emphasize too much on voluntary repatriation, it may lead towards an involuntary repatriation at the end if the repatriation gets delayed too much. And he also mentioned about or raising the point that if we, when we're thinking about or talking about a world that is becoming more and more borderless, and when we deal with refugee issues, and we've seen that it has becoming more like, strengthening the same old idea of maintaining the borders again. And finally, reluctant attitude of Myanmar. That's many of our speakers mentioned already in this session and previous session, that's making the situation more complex for the repatriation of the Rohingya crisis, Rohingya community from Bangladesh. And if we look into another perspective of repatriation, like what are the challenges of repatriation in general? So first, like we need to focus, or we see some of the challenges. So the first challenges that we see, protecting the rights and security of returning refugees as individuals, that we have been noticing in Bangladesh, and it's becoming more and more concerning issue. Like today, a group of Rohingyas being shifted to Bhashanchar, and their debate is going on already. And second, trying to ensure the peace and stability, and sometimes it can undermine the return of refugees. And third point is, by extension, trying to limit the potential that refugee crisis might undermine regional stability and security issues. That another concern that we also notice in terms of like when we deal with repatriation or talk about repatriation of the Rohingyas. And now if we look into the whole voices of the Rohingya into this whole problem, like my research is mainly qualitative and anthropological, and due to time limitations, I got some of the quotes from some of the my respondents from the camps. Like if we look into this first quote, I quote, "It is a matter of iman to live in your country. This is why I'm waiting to return to my homeland one day. I did not go for attaining the citizenship paperwork from Bangladesh." So an elderly Rohingya man living in Bangladesh for more than 30 years is mentioning that, like he still waits to go back to Bangladesh. And as you know, that there are many cases you can find that where people are getting fake identification card and getting into citizenship or passports and identification card, and they're getting into the local community in an unauthorized ways. And another, in contrast to that view, another middle-aged Rohingya man mentioned that we want our citizenship status in Myanmar, and we do not want to live like this. We want to return to our homeland. So these are the claims that they want to do, and they want to go back, and it also shows their eagerness. And in terms of Bhashanchar, like it's a debatable issue at this moment. And many people, they say that they do not want to go there. And some of them, they say that, okay, it's a little better than living into that confined camps. So this is one of the quotes. I'm not reading it because of time constraint, but this person, he's mentioning that there are a couple of points that are very interesting. So if they can live into Chittagong or Cox's Bazar, they can easily go into Myanmar to see. Some of them still have some relatives living in Rakhine State, so they can go there. And if you look into the camp situation in Cox's Bazar, Uki and Teknaf, you can see there are small businesses are there, so people can easily get into different kinds of informal sectors and to adapt to the and sort of adverse situation, and they can survive locally, like engaging into local labor force, which is creating another problem as well. And also the issue of third country relocation is there, but past initiatives, if we look into that, doesn't give us that hope, because I've got one figure, like there was 920 Rohingyas were accepted in various countries between 2006 and 2010. So compared to like nearly 1 million Rohingya, this figure is very tiny number. So it doesn't give us a positive hope that third country relocation will be a possible solution. So if in conclusion, we have a couple of points, to add. Like if we do not see a very sustainable and dignified repatriation for the Rohingya, then I use the word made. I know that it's a very heavy word, and it's a metaphoric terminology that I'm trying to use here. So if it becomes a made, then the crisis would linger, and the overall life will be the vulnerability will be prolonged for unknown period of time. We do not know how much time it will take to resolve the issue. And for that reason, some thoughts are coming from the experts and researchers that, and also from civil societies, that if we can convert this burden to a human resource, that could be one sort of possible area. And relocating to Bhasanchar, relocating them to Bhasanchar, I do not know to what extent would be a solution if you think from the bigger picture, but that gives a at least some people can go there, and according to government narrative, they can live a better life compared to living into the camps. And we need to have a comprehensive, integrated, and holistic policy with a long-term approaches. Otherwise, if we think from the vulnerability of their life, it would put their life more problematic and more further vulnerability. And
Siddiqui,
yes.
I want you to wrap up quickly. We are running out of
just
time.
1 minute.
So, sorry.
Yes. Just give me 1 minute. And if we do not have a potential effective tool to make it happen, then the dream of a homeland would remain as a dream. So and already 2 points I would add, and then I'll conclude. Already we have seen some sort of lack of social cohesion between the host and the Rohingya community, drug trade, human trafficking, unsafe migration, and we know that there are many people are trying to move from Cox's Bazar to different other countries, and that is putting their life further dangerous, further in danger, and also national and regional security threats are there. So under that scenario, I think we need to have a comprehensive approaches, and since it is believed that the solution to the hand of Myanmar, I think we need to have a global consciousness to influence Myanmar in this case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui. I think we are really running out of time, so instead of wasting any time, let me share my screen and do my presentation as quickly as I can. So here, let me go back. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I make it big, and let's begin. I will try to be as short as I can. So I'm going to talk about the state of Rohingya refugees in Malaysia. And this is a socio-ethnographic research. It's part of a broader research that I'm doing with UCL. So Professor Peter and Dr. Bias are also part of it. Professor Peter is the PI. I'm the co-researcher who covered the Malaysian chapter. So I will talk about the Rohingya refugee diaspora's case in Malaysia, and these people who fled from home inside Myanmar, and currently they are stuck in a stateless predicament inside Malaysia. They came in different waves, like they came in Bangladesh. So there are a number of years you can see on the slide I've highlighted, and they continue to come today, okay? And their number is increasing every year. As of April 2020, this year, the Rohingya comprise a substantial number of 100,000 plus population, which is 56% of the total refugee and asylum seekers in Malaysia. And on top of this, there are undocumented Rohingya refugees. Okay, they basically take two routes, maritime route by boat and land routes by crossing the border into Myanmar, into Thailand, and from there into Malaysia, as I have highlighted in the picture map. Malaysia, unlike many other countries, doesn't confine the refugees into any particular camp settlements, rather allow them to remain among the local population in urban and rural settings. And this policy allows the refugees to remain scattered and also remain invisible. There is a dearth of research when it comes to Rohingya refugees in Malaysia, because we mostly focus on Bangladesh and Myanmar. But little that we can find are valuable. They mostly focused on mental health and psychological aspects and little on educational aspects. Our purpose in this project is to draw from this ethnographic data and outline the diaspora's economic and socio-political life based on their perspective. So just to tell you that the data came from 4 different states of Malaysia over a period of time. We started in March 2019 until this year, June. We conducted our research, our fieldwork mostly in these 4 states, and particularly Kedah and Panelist are the border states with Thailand. So many refugees enter into Malaysia through the border states. So that is one reason why Kedah and Panelist were picked. When it comes to Penang and Kuala Lumpur, these are highly populated when it comes to Rohingya refugees in these particular 2 states. All together, we collected 60 in-depth interviews from the Rohingya refugees and 40 local Malaysian Malaysian locals, including Malay, Chinese, and Indian. Other than in the interviews, we used focus group discussion and observation. We also collected non-textual sources, such as musical lyrics, photographs, signs and symbols, and things like that. So if I quickly tell you about the government attitude, Malaysia is not a signatory to Refugee Convention or its protocol, and refugees are considered as temporary, having temporary shelter, although they have been living here for a long period of time. There is no legal framework to protect the refugees, and they are not supposed to stay here for long term. All the refugees in Malaysia are considered as illegal and prohibited immigrant under the Immigration Act, and their status, as you can see, because of this status, they often face harassment, detention, and deportation. Within these, the Rohingya refugees are the most marginalized because of their statelessness situation, and they have lesser chance to return and repatriate, and that also add to their sufferings. If we look at the previous government action so far, very little. You would see in 2006 there was an attempt to give certain work permit to the refugees, but it was halted after 17 days. 2013, Ministry of Home Affairs had another attempt, announced that the government would issue refugees a certain work permit, but it was then halted again. Only in 2016, the Ministry of Home Affairs announced a pilot project, particularly for a small number of refugees. It was like a test project for 300 refugees, those with the UNHCR card, to work in the plantation and manufacturing sector. So government has decided that which are the sectors they would work, and with other restrictions, like only men would be allowed to go there and stay there, and they had to leave their families. So ultimately what happened, it was a failed project, and not many refugees take up that challenge. So to talk about the host community's perspective, the attitude of the government of Malaysia to see the Rohingya refugees as illegal immigrants and not having any legal or administrative provisions to deal with the refugees has also reflected in the host community's response to their perception of the reasons behind Rohingya refugees coming to Malaysia. So although a majority of the respondents, 29 out of 40 from the host community, said that they believe the Rohingya refugees are in Malaysia to find shelter, to save their lives, to escape genocide in Myanmar, yet a significant number of respondents, 19, they believe that refugees are just like other economic migrant workers who are here to improve their lives and earning and send money home. Furthermore, a vast majority of the host community, that is 60%, appears to hold negative perception about the Rohingya refugees. They showed their concern over the increasing number of refugees in the country, and from our interviews, we also found that the host community often consider Rohingya refugees as a security threat, a reason for local unemployment, a reason for crime, social problem, a reason for environmental and cultural problems, and some of them fear that the refugees may want to stay permanently. Others believe that refugees are damaging the image and reputation of the country. So within all this negativity, life goes on for the refugees. How is their life? We tried to extract Rohingya, some lines from the Rohingya narratives. As you can see, most of our respondents mentioned that they don't have access to formal work opportunities. Others mentioned that sufferings greet us all the time, no respect for Rohingya in Malaysia. They are the unfortunate impoverished. They are called orang miskin in local term. Also kuraza means we are illiterate. So indicating their feelings of unordinance, fear and hopelessness living in Malaysia. Other than that, there is also conflict among the Rohingya community, particularly when it comes to their leadership. There are a number of Rohingya community organization. Only 2 out of all Rohingya community organizations, only 2 are registered with UNHCR. The 2 are highlighted here, RSM and WRDN. Others are not. Time to time, some of the leaders would say something, and that may also lead to more conflict within their community. And we have seen that before. So indicating that their marginal status has been aggravated by local and socio-political factors in Malaysia. So how are they coping with all these challenges? We need to understand that the refugees do not have work permit and they do not live in any camps. So they are always on move from one place to another and looking for jobs. And this COVID time has posed extra pressure and a situation for them, and many of the refugees lost their livelihood. This invisibility, that identity imposed on them, that they are not visible much, but they are present there. They are not invisible. So it also indicates that all these identities and all these challenges make this group their situation more worse. And to see how they cope, we understand that looking into their informal resistance, non-conventional form of resistance is an important aspect, and that is why we looked deeper into this. And this type of studies were done in other parts of the world by other scholars. For example, Michael Adas took the case where he talked about avoidance protect. I can see this. Michael Adas believes that this should, when it comes to avoidance, this should harm the target, and both should be aware of it. Whereas Benedict Anderson disagrees with others, and in his research in Philippines village, he highlighted that it not always has to be representative what the weak people are doing. Similarly, James Scott has also highlighted in his Weapons of the Weak that passive resistance also should be getting our attention, and those who are weak are mostly involved in indirect way of confrontation. So but with that emphasis, we are looking at it, and we found that when it comes to the Rohingya refugees, attachment to God plays an important role in their life. It actually works as a refuge to religion, and that is an alternative way for them to cope with their distressful refugee life. So if you want to know details later on, I will go details for this. I just want to show you one refugee songs shared by a refugee. They call it Tarana. Just would like to highlight that a quotation from a refugee who works as a daily laborer. He said, when asked how he feel when he sings a song, Hashimullah wiped his tears and said, when I sing, I embrace the Tarana, the song. Momentarily, I did not exist here. I felt the wind in my country as if I'm breathing the air again. Every time I close my eyes, the image of my homeland, the village, the relatives still haunt me. So you can see their belongingness. You can see the deprived heart that is talking in those musics and taranas. So at this point, I would like to highlight a few points that when it comes to the Rohingya refugees in Malaysia, I think that Malaysia needs to have a mechanism and a process that would help to formalize a work program for the Rohingya refugees in the country, because the refugees are already there working in the informal sector, but there has to be a mechanism so that exploitation and other things can be managed. And this would also lessen the burden of the host country and support conditions for return and repatriation by enhancing refugee self-reliance. This should also eventually, help the social cohesion part, where the locals and the refugees can have a better relation. We also would like to highlight that informal resistance as an important aspect that shows their resilience, that shows that refugees are trying to cope within the difficulties. So with that, I would like to stop here. How to go back to the former, okay, yes. Bias, do you have any questions? I think now we actually took a lot of time. We finished our.
Okay, so no problem.
So,
take 10 minutes, and
okay,
you have
wonderful.
8 questions. I can see in the Q&A.
Yes.
If you go there in that section,
okay,
you can cluster them and quickly try to answer some of them. Thank you.
Can anyone help how to go to that questions? To the
on the bottom
chat.
right of your screen, there's a Q&A.
Where is it?
Okay, I can read out some of the questions quickly.
Okay, yes, please, Bas, thanks.
Okay, so one question from Leslie is about whether the Rohingyas in Saudi Arabia are getting the equal rights as other Saudis.
Can I answer?
Yes.
Okay. Now we need to make a distinction between two groups. Those who arrived early among the first wave of migration, I think they received Saudi citizenship. So they now work for the government and private sectors. And those whose conditions were corrected back in between 2013 and 2017, they now hold the residence permit as being citizen of Myanmar. So they have access to free medication, and their children have access to free education like any other Saudi student.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, a question from Patricia to Dr. Siddiqui.
Okay.
It's a very interesting presentation, but the question is, would the resettlement generate the same problems of the relocation to Bhashan Char? Are there any other options for refugees in Bangladesh, like complementary pathways to protection in the Global Pact of Refugees?
Shall I respond?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Patricia, for your question. I think I agree with the first question that you mentioned. It could, or it would raise the same issue again, like separation that you mentioned from the family and friends. And regarding the second part, I think at this moment, like since Bangladesh is not the signatory of like 1951 Refugee Convention, so that's like one technical problem that sometimes Bangladesh cannot, if they if they do not recognize them as refugee, then there are many other issues that would not be able to possible for the government of Bangladesh to ensure. So that's the one technical problem. So maybe that's the reason, like we will not be able to comply with global pact. Other than that, we need to focus some other like solution that the government is taking care at the moment and focusing more and more on voluntary and dignified repatriation for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shahidul Haq, he wants to say something. Yes, Mr. Haq, you can turn your video on. And
okay, it's all right. I think the line is very unstable, so I rather only speak. I think tomorrow we'll have an opportunity to see each other. No, thank you very much for a very interesting kind of case studies. I have one clarification from Professor Pandit from the OP Jindal University. Very interesting documentary, but I don't know, I may have picked up wrongly, but I hear at least on 2 occasions that since Bangladesh did not give them refuge, that's why the Rohingya went to India. I have little difficulties with this narrative, number one. Number two, I have also difficulties with the number. It is 4,040.
Mr. Hawk, you are probably having technical issues on connecting.
Yes, but I could hear his first question. I'd like to answer that. I don't know. He understood that as Bangladesh refused to accept refugees, and that's why they're coming to India because of the.
I could. Sorry, could I finish my, because I got disconnected.
Yeah,
I haven't finished my question, and I could also interrupt your answers. And so that's one. The second one is that some of the pictures that you have shown, actually it is in Rohingya camp, especially when the boy is drinking water from the well. So I think perhaps you need to revisit this. Thank you. Please.
Which pictures are you talking about? Which one are you talking about? First, with respect to the first question, I don't know how you understood that. The point that we are saying is because of the overcrowding, and if you see the entire documentary, you will understand, because this was just like a 7-8 minute of the 22-minute documentary. If you see the entire documentary, you would understand that we are trying to say that because of the overcrowding in Bangladesh, and because of the pressure on resources, there is a reluctance to accept any more refugees there. That is the first clarification that I wanted to give. And regarding that, the images, I don't know which one specific image you're talking about, since your voice was breaking, but I don't know which image are you talking about. So we are not talking about, these images are not from Bangladesh. These images are from, some of them are from Myanmar, and some of them have been sourced from camps on the border. So I'm not anywhere trying to imply that these images are from the Bangladesh, because we haven't got them from Bangladesh.
Right, thank you for the question, and thank you for the answer, Aishwarya. Do you have any question, any other question, Abayas?
Lots of questions.
To any other presenter?
So one question from Barkatullah. Who are backing the government of Myanmar that make them reluctant to repatriate their citizens? Political question. Anyone wants to answer, but we need to wrap up this session in a few minutes.
Okay, let me try that one. I think a number of factors who are backing. Myanmar is not getting enough pressure from the international world that is there. But countries like Bangladesh and those who suffer for this crisis initiated by Myanmar, those countries are trying, and the case is now in international court. So we will hear what the court is saying. So international community is trying to create pressure, but still it's not enough to make Myanmar work. Another broad picture is that two members of the Security Council, they support Myanmar, China and Russia. And that is also another reason that things are very difficult to move forward if they bring any resolution and pass through. So still, academics and others, those who are working, NGO workers and others, we are trying our best to bring the Rohingya voice and working for their rights to go back to Myanmar. And this is part of our initiative to create pressure on Myanmar. Anyone else would like to add on?
Guys, can I just come in?
Yes, of course. Professor Amina.
Thank you very much. It is a question as well as an observation. I thought that it is important for me to come in. This is with regard to Dr. Oshara's, the documentary that she showed. And I would echo what Mr. Shahidul has said, that I did hear the documentary saying that they were harassed in Bangladesh, this particular terminal word, harassed. So I would like to know, I mean, if you have any evidences of that, because Oshare, this is on, as you mentioned, the link is there, the YouTube is there. So I think it is important for us to, if these things are there for everyone to see, to back these up with evidences. The second point is that you also mentioned about something about 50 lakhs migrants from Bangladesh. But when the NRC thing came out, we found that they were not from Bangladesh, majority of them from India. I mean, I think you really need need to do some really fact finding into this documentary. So these are just, I felt that I need to make this intervention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, dear, quickly. Yeah.
Yes. If you see the entire documentary, we are not the documentary doesn't say they were harassed in Bangladesh. It doesn't specifically say that. It is talking about harassment in Myanmar. Nowhere, I've written the script, it does not talk or imply about harassment in Bangladesh. It says harassment in Myanmar. I think you need to look at the documentary once again to have a clearer view. And with respect to the NRC, I agree with you. That was the argument of the Hindu right that they were Bangladesh refugees. But what it was found in the NRC was that they were, a large part of them were the Hindu residents. So it does say in the thing that these are the two legislations which are trying to be pushed by the government of India, which is a BJP-led government of the Hindu right, which is trying to, and that is why I cited the case of Assam. I cited the case of Assam, that what has been the problem in Assam and the demographic problem there, and that has contributed to this kind of unease with respect to refugees. So the argument forwarded is the argument of the Hindu right. Very clearly, it says that the BJP-led a government which is coming under this pressure is thinking about bringing about this legislation, two legislation, Citizen Amendment Bill and the NRC, and both are to appeal to a particular constituency which says that they are Bangladeshi immigrants, and there is a demographic invasion, and we need to check this demographic invasion. So if you look towards the end of the documentary, and if you look at Dr. Swami's opinions in the documentary, and Dev Chatterjee's, both one from Bengal and one a Rajya Sabha MP, both are saying, and we clearly label it as the argument of the Hindu right. They are clearly saying that this is a problem. How does the Hindu right see it as a problem? And this is a demographic invasion, and we will be outnumbered, and this and that. So the documentary is trying to put their opinions on board. It does not accept or anywhere say, well, their opinions forwarded by these people are true. It nowhere says that.
Okay, Oshria, thank you.
We have to wrap up,
think,
Dr.
Yes.
Farzana.
Yes, we would like to wrap up by saying that we try to, have a comparative, presentation to show the Rohingya case in 4 different countries. although our most discussion Q&A overshadowed with Bangladesh and India's case on the documentary, but I hope we need to see the documentary again. So that also good that we'll be going back to the documentary. So thank you very much, Aishwarya. I'm sorry that we had to cut short. We did not have enough time to play the entire video. I would like to thank Dr. Murad for participating and also Dr. Siddiqui for your wonderful presentation. And please keep in touch. If you have any other questions, please write us back through email and others. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Farzana and all the panelists for your really interesting and thought-provoking presentations. Now I would like to welcome Dr. Jessica Field. She will be moderating our next session or panel discussion on human rights and refugee advocacy from activist perspective. Dr. Jessica Field works as a lecturer at the Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction, and he has been working on the Rohingya crisis over the last several years. Thank you. Jess, it's up to you now.
Thank you so much, Bayez. Quick question, should there be a brief break right now, or is it directly into this panel?
Yeah, it was supposed to be 15 minutes, but yeah, no break right now. Sorry, you can continue.
So sorry, Jessica.
No, don't worry. I hope everyone else is okay. And I think most of the attendees have their cameras off, so please do stretch and walk around and get some water while watching. Yeah. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much for your panel beforehand as well, Farzana. It's great to be part of such a great team here behind this conference. So first I want to begin by saying thank you to Bayez, to Imtiaz and to Peter and everyone else who sit behind this conference and the wider British Academy Rohingya project. So as Bayez gave a bit of a brief overview, this panel is about human rights and refugee advocacy from the perspective of activists themselves. So thank you so much for attending over the course of today and staying with us for this final panel. What we want to do with this is have a bit more of a discussion-based panel rather than a presentation-based one, and it will build on the previous panels, look at Rohingya protection in different contexts, but it will take a step back even further and look at the global human rights and humanitarian environment to put some of these discussions we've been having today in a bit of a broader context. And that is because, as we're all very familiar with, across many countries in the world today, there seems to be a race to the bottom when it comes to the protection of basic human rights. Of course, the genocide of the Rohingya in Myanmar is one of the most pressing and urgent concerns at the moment, but we're also seeing increased surveillance, discrimination and protection gaps for the Rohingya in other countries as well, in Malaysia, India, Bangladesh. And then elsewhere in the world, we are seeing deepening surveillance and repression in countries like China, particularly for the Uyghur community who are facing brutal ethnic cleansing. In the US, the Trump administration, thankfully on its way out now, has institutionalized inhumane immigration and detention policies within its own soil in the United States, but it's also undermined humanitarian law and human rights overseas as well. Turkey, you're seeing increased, a key kind of host of the Syrian refugee population and a significant humanitarian player in its own right. You're seeing increasing arrests of journalists, new censorship laws being passed. And here in the UK as well, questions have been raised about the welfare and protection of detained and deported asylum seekers in recent months and years. And the list, the list is endless. We could name a variety of different countries where we're seeing this kind of deterioration in human rights and refugee protection. And of course, these repressive shifts are having the worst impact on the affected and targeted communities. But activists and humanitarian workers as well are finding it increasingly challenging to work in these circumstances. And these actors, these activists, advocates and workers are key voices striving for protection of groups like the Rohingya. Actually, I was just looking at human rights related news today, and there's another news story. There's an American human rights activist who's facing expulsion from Russia because of the work she's been doing within the country. So it's an ongoing and rising challenge. So this kind of global environment is the backdrop to our panel, the final panel of this conference today. And I'm really excited to be joined by three fantastic speakers who have years of experience at the forefront of humanitarian work, activism, advocacy in a range of different contexts, from South Asia to the Middle East and to the UK. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a bit more of a conversational panel where I'm hoping to draw on the experiences and perspectives of these panelists and hear how they've changed, how they've seen things change over the years during the course of their work. So I'm delighted to be joined by, and they will introduce themselves in much more detail very soon, but in alphabetical order by first name, Ali Johar, if you want to give a wave, Ali. So Ali is a co-founder of the Rohingya Human Rights Initiative in India and a founder and director of the Rohingya Literacy Program. Lamiz Hafiz is the operations director of the Muslim Council of Britain, and Rahima Begum is the co-founder and director of the grassroots human rights organization Restless Beings. So what I'll ask you guys to do is, perhaps in that order, just give a bit of a brief introduction of yourselves, the organization you work for, the work that you do at the moment, and then I'll launch into a bunch of questions that will hopefully draw out some of your human rights and advocacy experience. So Ali, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thanks to the organizers for organizing this wonderful panel discussion and conference at this moment. As you rightfully introduced, my name is Ali Johar. I'm in India since 2012. Currently, I'm doing international law, humanitarian and refugee law in Delhi. So I've been working with agencies like UNHCR and its implementing partner, as well as I have been working with our own organization, Rohingya Human Rights Initiative, as a director of education and as a co-founder. So we have been working with detained refugees. We have been responding humanitarian crises, emergency crises like fire incidents and other things. We have been involved with discussion with the government as well.
Excellent, thank you. And so pleased to have you here, Ali. Lamiz, if you'd like to give a bit of an introduction about yourself.
Thanks so much, Jess. Hello, everyone. And I'd just like to reiterate as well, I feel very honored to be a guest on this panel. I don't know if I have any extra experience to bring to the table, but I thank Jess for bringing me here. I've known Jess very much so from my background in humanitarian work. I was based out on working on the Syria conflict for about 5 or 6 years, back and forth between Syria, Turkey, Jordan, and Iraq in particular. And then I returned back to the UK and worked very much with Syrian organizations here as well, until I came on board with the Muslim Council of Britain last year. But I guess my perspective will be one of how I saw situations on the ground evolve, but also how I think globally there has been a real degrading of human rights and the way, I guess, the human rights perspective is seen. And I think I link that up very much with the work that I've seen here in the UK, particularly around placing Islamophobia within a rights perspective and the global rise of that, which we see very much within some of these, I guess, conflicts that we see and the different protection issues that we see arising in different states. So that's me. Hope that was good enough, Jessica.
It was excellent, thank you, and really looking forward to hearing these grounded experiences of these topics as well. Okay, fantastic. Rahima, if you'd like to give a bit of a brief intro to yourself.
Hi everyone, so I'm Rahima, and thank you, Jessica, for having me on this panel. Just as Lami said, very, very honored to be part of it, and for UCL and Center of Genocide Studies at Dhaka for organizing this. So I'm from an organization called Restless Beings. We're an international human rights organization, also an activist group, and we've been around for about almost 13 years now. So in terms of kind of the center of what we do, it's working with marginalized communities. So we work with women and girls in Kyrgyzstan and across Central Asia in terms of bride kidnapping issues and women's rights issues there, and working towards changing legislations. We work with the Rohingya community. One of the larger projects and one of the main parts of what we do at Restless Beings is working with the Rohingya community, and have been doing so throughout this decade. We also work across Punjab. We have agrarian projects. So it's about kind of finding ways in which we can make the work of activism accessible to all, and breaking down some of the sort of institutional pillars of how this works, how we mobilize communities, how we really make a difference from a grounds up kind of approach as opposed to a top down one. And so I think my views today will kind of reflect that. You know, what has changed on the ground? How do we mobilize now as activists? What's changed in the last 12 years, especially in terms of our access to the Rohingya community? So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I'm excited to kind of learn from everyone and exchange these thoughts.
Excellent, thank you. And actually, yeah, with all of your brief introductions as well, you know, I set the scene for the panel in quite a depressing way, actually, talking about the deteriorating global human rights environment. But the work all of you are doing across the different organizations you've worked for and run shows that actually there's also a huge surge and richness in grassroots human rights activism and humanitarian work as well, equally contending against the deteriorating human rights environment at the political level. So you all have a lot of experience in different contexts. So my first question would be, how have you seen humanitarian and human rights work change since you began working in the area, whether in a particular national context or more globally? And I'll open that out to whoever wants to jump in first.
Wow, okay, I guess I'll go first, just nobody else is speaking. So I actually started out the main bulk of my career in humanitarian work in the Syria conflict, although obviously I'd worked previously in different places and had experience in places like Mindanao and the Philippines. And I think there had already been that shift in terms of how we did humanitarian work from very let's go with a very needs-based approach to a very, a rights-based approach. And this was sort of the language that we were always learning about as well. If you logged on to any course at university, this was the new lingo. And the development of, the development of humanitarian nexus and how we bring it all together. And protection became that sort of key word. Wherever you went, it was all about, how we protection mainstreaming, how we ensuring that, we're looking at the rights of the individuals, the different issues that they might face, whether they're, of different vulnerable communities, children, women, elderly, people, different ethnicities that might be targeted. And it was very much the buzzword. But I think the biggest thing that I've seen is that despite that language being very much on the agenda and at the forefront, we talk about protection a lot, but the implementation of protection, particularly at a larger state and international level, I wouldn't really, from a ground-based perspective, I would say it's not really there, to be blunt. It's a buzzword. Whichever UN cluster system you walk into, whether you're looking at even resolutions being passed at the Security Council level, it's all there. But when you look at the ground, I was working on Syria. The first and the most heavily hit targets were always hospitals and clinics. Continued to be the case up to today. School facilities were always at the forefront. These were the things that we were always trying to do. There was a lot of cases of underground hospitals, finding ways to protect clinics and disguise them. And I think this is true in a lot of conflict zones currently. And if we look globally, I think there's also been a change in that international idea of there was a very right to protect when that came in. I think at a Security Council level, we can go all the way back to Kosovo and where that became a real thing. Again, I think post-Iraq, post-Syria, a lot of things have changed in the interventionist ideas, and those interventionist ideas again were rooted in protection, whether we disagree with them or agree with them. They were rooted in the idea of protections for communities that were at risk, and that sort of idea has shifted globally. I think there's sort of a sitting back from it and not wanting to engage in the same way to protect those communities. And I think we can see that in the diplomacy and engagement within different conflicts around the world, whether we look at Rohingya and how much that stays in that international conversation, whether we look at the Uyghur issue right now, whether we look at Kashmir indeed, actually my background is Kashmir myself, it's something I relate to very strongly, but all of these conversations as you see them ongoing, the strength of that dialogue in terms of protection being so important and us implementing that and enforcing it as an international community, I think that's really decreased. That's just my little beginner to get the conversation going.
Yeah, no, super interesting. Just at the, as you say, just at the point that the almost ownership over human rights vocabulary and action widened with the humanitarian sector, as you say, starting to mainstream and take on that approach. It also at the ground level started hollowing out slightly and wasn't implemented in the same way. I mean, Rahima, have you seen this reflected in your work on the ground?
Absolutely. In some levels I have actually. I mean, in terms of visibility, at least, I started, look, the Rohingya community, we all know, 60 years of persecution. I started working with the Rohingya community a decade ago. And so I remember my initial visits, and those visits were determined by a need to see what's going on in the border region of Bangladesh and Burma, but also to see how many Rohingya were inside the camps. There were Rohingya that had been there for 22 years, prior to my visit 12 years ago. And so, they were the initial kind of flood of Rohingya who had come and sought refuge. And my main observations were just kind of to look at what the local capacity was, what did it look like, sound like, feel like, what support was available, what structures of development were in place. And at the time, the access to those parts of Bangladesh and the Burma border region and to speak to the Rohingya, I mean, it felt easier. Maybe not so safe, but it felt easier. And from that period to now, where we have a lot more red tape, obviously getting into the camps, it's difficult. It's safer. Of course, we have a huge influx of the Rohingya community. But what I've noticed in that 12-year period is a bunch of things in terms of visibility. One of the things, we have the Rohingya diaspora now actually speaking a little bit more about the issues and feeling safer to do so. 12 years ago, every time I spoke to someone in Canada or in the UK from the Rohingya community, there was a genuine fear of, I don't want to say too much. And it's great to be able to have that visibility in terms of where organizations have worked and how they've worked. 12 years ago, it was about keeping the Rohingya community that were in the camps in Bangladesh at the time alive. And that was it. And it was about how can we support the Rohingya community by ensuring there's food on the ground and then leave the rest to local capacity. Now there's discussions, especially in the last year, of how can we think about supporting the Rohingya community by placing things like human dignity at the forefront? How can we implement those ideals? I mean, the Rohingya community now, I mean, we as an organization, we've been fighting tooth and nail to try and get some accountability, as have many organizations across the world. And now we see the Rohingya issue being discussed on a state level. There's an ICJ case, we have an ICC one coming up. So there's been some international traction. And for activists like myself, that's great. Still not enough, long way to go, but it's great to see. So I think there is visibility. I don't know if the implementation of everything that organizations, international human rights agencies, as activists, institutions, all the goals that we have in place of how we can best support a community that has sought refuge and needs protection all the way, needs it more than ever now, because they've been there for the last 3 years, the 750,000 plus, others have been there for 22 years plus. They need that protection more than ever. How do we implement it? Is it actually being implemented? Will we be here for the next 10 years? So yes, there's a visibility. I have similar concerns to Lamis in terms of how we realize and see some of that through implementation. But those are the kind of changes I've seen a lot.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about a move towards slightly more complex views of human rights and experiences on the ground, with a focus on, for example, human dignity, that's been a really positive change in the last few years. But I think it's still slightly awkwardly worked out by organizations in different contexts, but a positive step anyway. Ali, if I might invite you in on this particular point and ask from your perspective as a Rohingya activist on the ground in India, how have you seen things change for you and your organizations over the last few years?
So actually, I would like to start from the beginning, like when I fled the country. When I fled the country in 2005, I even didn't know that, the why I'm fleeing. Actually, we are fleeing from a persecution, from from a genocidal intent. So after coming to Bangladesh, I have experienced that a lot of people helped me to get back to my normal life. I got help from a retired teacher to get back to my formal education again. Without his help, maybe I am not at this place today. So at the same time, I have faced, racial discriminations and protection issues, which is why I have to flee to India to seek a safer place. So after coming to India only, I have realized that, we are fleeing from really a genocide or a persecution. That is the exact moment in 2012 I started realizing I had to do something, even though I was just a teenager, but I had to become a bonded labor instead of helping my community or helping myself. So after a year, I've got help from some agencies to get back to my education. Then after getting into university in the year 2016, I have got to be connected with friends from Indian society as well as from organizations, human rights activists. So since then only, I have started working. I have been able to really be able to work for my community in terms of helping the youths to decide a future, get back to their normal life through education. During this period, what I have realized is earlier it was, the human right campaigns and things were dependent on books, newspaper, and other publications. Currently, the era is of social media, where we're facing both the kinds of people, like who are supporting or who are against. So here we have negative and positive support as well. So after establishing our own organization, we were being able to represent ourselves better in the at the government level, as well as in other forums. We were able to identify ourselves. See, we were able to represent ourselves, and we were able to work with organizations where actually organizations were working for us instead of working with us. So what I have realized in this experience is, working with us is more important than working for us. So that is what I always say to everyone who say what to be done for the Rohingya community. So in terms of because of the social media impact, as we always realize that regime and governments always hold the human right perspective, and it is always we throughout the study we find out that it is always majoritarian support that human right is defined. So in that context, countries in Europe, like and Western countries like Canada has supported our cause, America supported our cause, who are very far. But in this region where we actually need support from neighboring countries, we have got the negative side. So that is where our problem is stuck. Otherwise, we have seen something else for the Rohingyas.
Thank you, Ali. You raised so many points I want to pick up on there, and we'll get Lamise and Rahima to respond to you too. The first one, your very brief anecdote about getting help from a retired teacher when I think first that was in Bangladesh, wasn't it? It made me think that actually, as much as there is the professional human rights, capital H, capital R industry that has grown, exponentially over decades, there has always been that very personal ground level relationship that has driven human rights activism, advocacy, humanitarian work, and these relationships still remain really important. So I just wanted to highlight that particular thing. But I think that the major thing, the big thing that you raised links to Rahima's point about visibility. Social media is a key vehicle for that, for both better and for worse. And my next question actually was around kind of popular opinions and attitudes towards human rights, refugee protection, and different issues. So I wonder if Rahima or Lamiz, you want to pick up on anything Ali was saying around social media and those kind of attitudes.
I mean, I'll say a little bit about the social media side of things, just simply because at least 70% of what I do at Restless Beings runs off social media. So every protest we organize, every time we're mobilizing all the universities that we work with in the UK and across the world, be it students, lobbying together in Calcutta, those in London, the ones I'm speaking to in South Africa, it's always on social media and the impact of that. I mean, I have team members that are going to look for Twitter trends, trying to find the right hashtag. And it all sounds really sort of laborious, but ultimately that impact that it can make in 24 hours is phenomenal. And we've seen this, I mean, maybe not so much in the last year, but especially sort of around 2017, 2016, straight after the influx, going into early 2018, social media has been great, mobilizing the youth, mobilizing general public, getting the engagement from mainstream media, who prior to 2017, you'd be very lucky to get an article into The Guardian about the Rohingya community. Bam, August 5th of 2017 onwards, all the way until January 2018, every mainstream media house in the UK and abroad has covered the Rohingya. I remember we were facilitating journalists from CNN and smuggling them into Burma back in sort of 2013 to try and get some footage. And, there was all these thoughts of, how can we do this safely? How can we ensure that the Rohingya agency was coming through and it wasn't being shadowed by mainstream media? How can we ensure this was safely delivered on social media? Because as soon as you put anything out that is pro-Rohingya, and I'm sure Ali and Lamiz will agree with this, is you get the influx of hate and abuse from the other side. And so it was about trying to find a way to do this where, it was supporting the community. It was ensuring that we were talking about the right things, the human rights abuses, informing people that yes, the Rohingya are Muslim, but there is a portion of Rohingya Hindu who have experienced the same thing. 400 plus living in the Bangladesh camps are Rohingya Hindu. So now we can talk about religion, but then what about, the persecution that they faced in entering into Bangladesh, and why did they flee? And that's very, very important. So it was about bringing in this issue back into the realm of human rights and saying, this is a human issue. This is something that we must get involved with. And doing all of those things and getting all of these complex layers of thoughts out on social media can be difficult, it can be problematic, but it's been a brilliant vehicle, at least in terms of allowing us to do the work that we do. So it's a machine that I think activists will rely on for as long as we can, because it allows us to do the work that we do as safely as possible right now. I mean, otherwise I would love to fly into Burma right now and have a one-to-one with, the perpetrators, but that's never going to happen, right? So we air all of this on social media, and if it helps make a change, then that's something, that's a landscape that we support.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, it's even if you wanted to, you couldn't avoid it as a means of engagement, for better and for worse. Lamiz, did you want to come in as well and say something about social media?
I feel Rahima brings such positive perspective to the activist journey, and then I'm just going to come and be it down on the opposite side. But it's good. We're balancing each other out. I think one of the biggest things that I had down when I was thinking about the questions that you would ask us, Jess, was how has it changed? And the biggest change really has been the rise of social media in the last 10, 15 years, with the arrival of Twitter. And actually, I started working in the Middle East from essentially when the revolutions happened in 2010, 2011. And social media, Twitter, was a key driver behind how those things happened. But I think what we saw happen afterwards, unfortunately, showed that obviously you can't have a social media only revolution, one, and also the negatives that can come from social media as well, and that it can be a driver for conflict, it can be a driver for hatred, especially when it's not being moderated well, and particularly given, unfortunately, the way that algorithms work on many of these platforms. And we've seen that in different places. I think it's come out in UN reports, you know, with missions to well, around the Rohingya for sure, in terms of how Facebook was used, but also in Sri Lanka in terms of some of the anti-Muslim violence that happened there. But we've seen it across the board. We see it very much across Europe right now as well. If we look at, you know, the refugee crisis in the Mediterranean, crisis for the refugees more so than Europe, I would say. But when we look at that, a lot of the hatred that you really see, and a lot of the far right hate speech that you see, has really taken and embedded itself in a lot of these social media platforms, because we haven't dealt well with the opportunities that these platforms now give that kind of speech. And unfortunately, we haven't dealt well with the way the algorithms work, and not enough of us know how they work in order to deal with it. And I think we've seen that very clearly in the West with legislators, etc. And we see it globally, and that's something that really needs to be taken hold of, because I think, you know, we see a rise in structural violence across the world. We see a rise in unfortunately, also state-sponsored Islamophobia, which is very much linked to that. And I think in times of crisis, but also in times of economic crisis, you often see a rise in hate that drives people apart, right? And it's often a tool that's used by different people in power. And I think we see that a lot in different places across the globe right now. And I think the human rights dialogue is really part of that, because we're seeing it, you know, as much as I think local communities acting on the ground, whether it's to do with the Rohingya, whether it's, you know, Syrian activists on the ground or Iraqis on the ground, wherever it might be, because they're always the first raisers of the alarm. As much as the good work in terms of documenting and speaking out is happening, unfortunately, we're not seeing that being taken up at a higher level. And I think I'll probably harp on about this quite a lot, but it's one of the biggest things that I see. I think you see, you know, one of my most positive experiences in the Syria crisis was the amazing work that Syrian community-led organizations were doing, and the amazing work they did to come together on a global level and try and speak and have a voice and really push for change. But what I've seen over the last, you know, 4 years in particular, I think, is that voice getting dampened slowly. And I think, you know, there's been a real flaking away of some of that human rights dialogue at an international level, because we can speak about it at the individual level on the ground, you can speak about it at the community and organizations, but then that's international level of taking action on a wider level. And I think that really isn't happening the way that we want it to. And I think that's what's really worrying for me as a person who works, you know, as a humanitarian, who works in terms of human rights, who works in terms of advocacy on behalf of communities. At the Muslim Council of Britain right now, we've been doing a lot of work on Islamophobia in the UK, Islamophobia in political parties here. And, you know, we've made several submissions to the Equality and Human Rights Commission around identifying Islamophobia in political parties in the UK, and a lot of that hasn't been taken up in the same way. And it has been, and we really tried to approach it as a community from a human rights perspective, in terms of an erosion of the, you know, rights, but also Islamophobia as, you know, a being rooted in racism, and it really targeting, based on the APP definition, you know, it's targeting expressions of Muslimness. And I think you see that, if you take that, you can see it in a global perspective, acted out in all of these different environments. And I think it does us well as activists to see that globally and make those linkages, because it's important to realize, just like it is with climate change, that it's just not one issue here and one issue here, but all of these issues are linked together and we need to tackle them holistically. And so you can see the same things being played out, but maybe they've reached, unfortunately, different levels of, you know, extreme manifestations in different places. But the same, you know, the same drivers are there, the same symptoms are there, and where we can identify them early and take action as communities together to counteract them, that's where we're not going to get to the place where we got to with the Rohingya, hopefully. But my concern is that I don't see that happening, and I see social media, unfortunately, as a huge driver of that negativity. Enough from me. Maybe Rahima or Ali can bring the positive back, Jessica.
No, I think you raised such important points though as well, especially around digital literacy, you know, and having to fight this battle, this activism battle, for want of a better phrase, on multiple fronts, not just getting the message out there, but supporting others to interpret or break down the more problematic messages that proliferate on these platforms. And it can be hard because, you know, I don't know, I mean, you guys are all kind of experts on digital media activism, but this is something I really struggle with. I'm not sure even how to use these platforms well for myself, for the causes that I want to advocate for. And you know, so it's incredibly difficult for those that are even less exposed to these digital platforms to perhaps process information and share things that matter. So social media is one area that has kind of you know, massively democratized participation in human rights causes. Another kind of digital thing, I suppose, that might have expanded organizations' abilities to engage in human rights work and activism is fundraising and funding on online platforms. You know, there's a lot more opportunity, arguably, to access smaller pots of money from ordinary givers, whereas before, perhaps previously, you'd have to go to institutional donors to do this kind of work. So I wanted to ask a question framed around funding, the kind of nuts and bolts of human rights and humanitarian work, the stuff that enables you guys to carry on doing what you're doing. How have you found the funding environment change over the last few years? It's a horrible can of worms to open out to. Yeah, are we heading in a good direction or otherwise?
I might jump into this, unless Ali, you want to jump in. But Olamis,
No, please continue. I'll get in.
I mean, it's interesting you just asked this, because it was only just last week I was saying to someone, my colleague, that it's really difficult to get funding this year, especially. I think COVID has just exacerbated a lot of issues, especially with the kind of work that we do. And understandably so, you know, where funding agencies might need to redirect who they support. Maybe organizations that it would have otherwise supported international projects are now thinking about national projects, supporting the NHS, etc. So understandably, but that then really puts us in a difficult position when it comes to how can we support some of the world's most vulnerable communities who are living not just in fear of COVID, but also in fear of extreme weather, in fear of their temporary shelter being blown away, or not having food, or international aid agencies leaving the camps because they need to be with their loved ones during this period of lockdown or global pandemic. So, and that's something that we saw since sort of spring this year happening within the Rohingya camp specifically. So that is something that has been difficult. As an organization, it was only this year that we tried to apply for funding for the first time and looked at a few funding organizations. Otherwise, we've pretty much for the last decade relied completely on public funding. So we organize music gigs. In terms of nuts and bolts, Jessica, our nuts and bolts are, we look at art, theater, and music as ways of bringing people under a space and breaking down the borders, because we think that, well, you know, art and creativity closes down those borders between people and communities, brings us all together in a space of shared joy. And in that space of shared joy, if we can then also talk about some of these devastating, you know, crises that exist in the world, some of the issues that we, you know, brush under the carpet, then maybe there's a way, maybe that person who's come to watch their favorite band play in a gig in East London will go away thinking, hang on a minute, I know about this genocidal regime and I didn't know this prior to Friday night. And now I'm going to speak about it when I go to university, or when I'm, you know, next over the dining table with family and friends. So those are the kinds of mechanisms that we use as an organization to try and raise funds. And it hasn't been the easiest, you know, I mean, COVID, what gigs? We can't organize anything. So it hasn't been the easiest. Otherwise, it is being as creative as we can in terms of campaigning. But the social media space, the online space, for us as an organization, I can speak positively about that. Definitely, it has been great for us to be able to raise funds for the communities that we work with directly on social media or via, you know, our website, etc., or these creative gigs. But it is worrying. It's worrying because in the last few years, what we have noticed, and we've been contacted about this a lot, is when you have, small pockets of money that has been raised that doesn't reach the community, or there's restrictions, or you're trying to support, for example, a few years ago, we wanted to transfer some money and support a community in one region in the world, and it was held back for months and months and months because of state issues, and then eventually that money got through. So those kinds of things happen, and organizations face this. So, and that's kind of digressing from your initial question, but those are kind of, as an organization, those are our nuts and bolts, and in how we fundraise, it's become very difficult, very, very difficult, Jessica. And funding bodies just are not available right now in the same way they would have been maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And that's even, as you say, setting aside the bureaucracy and the delays that come when things are working in quote unquote normal times.
Yeah.
Ali, can I bring you in on the funding question? Because I've had the privilege of collaborating with you on research over the last couple of years, and I've seen it in real life how you manage being a co-founder of an activist organization and an education program, as well as trying to undertake your own studies within Delhi and live your life, and sustainability of these initiatives can be quite difficult. And I wonder if you want to share a little bit about some of the funding challenges that you've had and how they might have impacted the kind of human rights and humanitarian work that you've been doing with the community in India. If you've not frozen.
A lot of things,
Perfect.
Am I hearable?
Yes, you're audible.
So whatever we do, most of the fund, majority of the fund comes from the, crowdfunding sources. So social media has been a great support for whatever we have done, or whatever awareness we were being able to raise. So some of the examples we have, earlier, before social media was not so much active, we were unable to, attend any emergency crisis. Like we have attended in Delhi, the fire crisis, a fire incident that we have responded in Haryana, fire incident we have responded in Jammu. So because of the social media, the messages can be reached to thousands of people very quickly, and we have got a lot of positive response on that. So in fact, while there was this genocide and torture against Rohingyas and this inhumanity on the Rohingya community since years, it was not so much highlighted because because those times were not like this. But after social media, in 2016-17, what we have seen is very different. All this exodus has been very much, reported by medias, and all the atrocities. Most of the atrocities has been recorded by the Rohingya themselves on their cell phones, and which got flooded on the social media. At the same time, on the other side, we have got hate campaigners who, campaigned to inject hate among the general public, and to create a perspective against Rohingya community in Myanmar. In fact, it is very serious and alarming that a lot of social media, including Facebook, has been, accused of supporting this genocide campaign, or not verifying their content, and not being able to control the fake news that has been circulated to make the mindset against Rohingyas. So we have seen the example of Kushi, who have lost her university education in Bangladesh because she was exposed to social media, and the government took a very unfortunate action against her. So this thing we have seen. At the same time, on the positive side, I'd like to highlight other thing is education. So Rohingyas got a platform to share their experience, whatever they have, with other Rohingyas. Like you'll get a lot of YouTube channel on English speaking courses in Rohingya languages and other, as well as the news media on Rohingya that are giving correct information to the Rohingya community. Otherwise, we would, this could have been worse. So we have experience from both the side, like positively as well as negatively.
Thank you, Ali. And actually, now might be the time that there's been a question from Sheikh Abdur Rahman in the one of the attendees about the media. So I wonder if I might ask this to you all. Do you think that the active role of the media can adequately pressurize Myanmar in Rohingya repatriation? So I don't know if one of you wants to take that. And I encourage as well, just while you're thinking about the question, I encourage all of the participants, if you just post the questions as we go along, and I'll slot them in where appropriate, but we'll also have a 10-15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So just to repeat the question to the panelists, do you think that the active role of the media can adequately pressurize Myanmar in Rohingya repatriation? Ali, do you want to start with that?
Well, media can play a very major role, but it is always with the policymakers and the government, and their willingness to resolve this crisis. Within Myanmar, media has played a very big role because all the medias are being controlled by the state, and all the opinions are being controlled by the state. So in the global context, we have seen a lot of media articles, a lot of exposure, a lot of pressure, but we haven't seen anything, improved on the side of human rights. If we talk about the Rohingyas, it is getting worse day by day. Like it is getting restricted day by day. Where we are seeing a lot of conferences, media exposures every day. Every day at the same time, we are seeing a lot of killings in humanity against the Rohingyas. So I personally don't think it can be conflicted by other opinion. I personally don't think media can do much more. But what I feel is it is always on the government's opinion and willingness. Shall it be Bangladesh, India, or China? We have two big countries who are playing major roles here, like India and China.
So thanks. Oh yeah, continue, please.
Sorry, no, I was just going to agree with Ali. I mean, the media can do what it can do. It can expose, it can raise awareness, and it can just kind of report. A couple of days ago, we had an article at The Guardian saying the genocide of the Rohingya is still continuing. There are so-and-so numbers of Rohingya left, and this is still happening. Great. That's great for the mainstream sort of, psyche. But what's really important more than the media is we need all the states that are involved in directly investing into Burma to really consider their investments. Japan being one of the highest, Korea being one of the highest. We have to remember that India only last year has signed a deal with Burma to build golf courses in the same place where the Rohingya community used to live. Their home, their grandfathers, their ancestral homes in Arakan are going to now be converted into golf courses and 5-star hotels. These are the people that are investing into a country where a genocide took place. And those are the people and those are the states that need to pressurize, that need to detract. And those are the states that we need to pressurize as activists and sort of civil society groups. So I think the media is very limited right now. I think where we're heading with the Rohingya case now, and in terms of seeking real accountability, much like Rwanda and any other sort of genocidal regime in history, we really need to look at the states that support the persecuting state. And in this situation, I don't think media can do any more than what it already is.
Thank you. So yeah, the media is a component, but not the whole part, and other parts need to function and contribute according to their level of power, I suppose, and responsibility. Lamise, do you want to come in on that?
No, I think I was going to say something very similar. I think media is just one part of the puzzle, and I think they have an ability to influence that we as activists can take advantage of. But it's very much part of what Rahima mentioned, which is the accountability picture, right? Is that we we can use the media to help highlight and hold actors accountable, and doing it in a public setting, which media allows you to do, raises awareness and creates, because what we're really, when things really change is when you get a critical mass of opinion behind you, right? The amount of negative opinion a state faces has to be more so than the advantages that they're getting from carrying on the way that they are, right? So until it reaches such a state that it's worse for them not to follow through. Unfortunately, that's how power works, right? We can't live in this ideal, we be idealists and just think everybody's going to change because they know that it's right to do so. That's not how the world works currently, unfortunately. So there has to be a critical mass of opinion there that forces states to move in a certain direction. And the media can help us do that. So us getting more stories out there can help us to influence public opinion and influence political opinion and political will. I think, unfortunately, that's where we're not at for a lot of the places that we are activists for right now. Unfortunately, we haven't got that critical will yet. What we do have, again, and this is now the positive side, which was mentioned previously, is that social media can allow us to build more of this critical mass of opinion in a way that we weren't able to do so previously. So previously, for instance, Rahima just mentioned Rwanda, their radio was very effective in the negative side of that genocide happening, very much so. And I think social media has played a similar part in different parts of the world. But what we didn't have control of in those crises is that we didn't have that power. We couldn't put out mass newspapers. We couldn't put out mass messaging on radio the same way maybe the side that was, unfortunately enforcing the structural violence was able to do. But social media, like you said, has democratized communication in such a way that now we can influence, and we can do that positive action as activists. I think there's a lot more that we need to do and we hope to do. And that's really where, Jessica, your first question around funding comes in, is that in order to do all of this work, it requires funds. Activists also need to live and survive. Whether you're community activists on the ground in those countries or you're activists on the international front, right? Everybody needs to live. So that work needs to be funded, and you need materials, and you need to push your messaging on social media. The reality is governments, states, power players have funding behind them. They can fund mass campaigns on social media, just like they did in the US elections. That power we don't have because we don't have the same level of funds. And so although social media has a democratizing factor behind it, the reality is the world also still works via funds. Digital fundraising has grown extensively in the last 10 years. It brings with it new power for us as activists, and crowdfunding is a great source. But there's still a long way to go, and I think it always links back to that awareness raising, and it's like a constant back and forth. And so I brought some positive, but I brought some negative again too. Sorry.
Well, it's a perfect bridge, actually. We've had another question from Saleha Islam regarding fundraising. So perfect bridge to the question. Does the panel think that if some of the charities partner up in regards to fundraising for the Rohingya, this would be beneficial? Many charities end up doing the same thing, whereas it might be better to work in partnership. I can see Lemi smiling, because I know this is something that she in particular has I was going to say ranted about a lot, but that's the wrong way to frame it. I will open this question about fundraising and collaboration up for whoever wants to jump in first. Rahima, I can see you.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I absolutely agree. I think the more we can partner up, I mean, at Restless Beings, obviously we're a human rights organization. We kind of occupy a strange space between sort of academia, where we do research work, advocacy work, and just directly working with think tanks and doing consultation. But then we also have our charitable activities, organizing the gigs and all the various activities to try and raise funds so we can directly support the communities that we work with. And wherever there's an opportunity for us to partner with charities, small and local businesses, grassroots movements, organizations, university societies, we always encourage it. I mean, we have this hashtag, and I'm going to mention social media again, and it's really cheesy, and it's called Together We're Stronger. And honestly, to the spirit of those words, I mean, it's only possible if 20 organizations got together and fundraised together, it's going to obviously have a bigger impact. So I think, yes, the more we can partner and stop sort of repeating and being in our own little echo chambers, the more we can work faster and more effectively.
Louise, do you want to add anything onto that?
It's so funny. I have ranted about this a lot. It's so funny that Rahima mentioned echo chamber, because I remember a report on the Syrian crisis that had a very similar name, if you remember. As Jess has accurately said, I think I ranted about this a lot because I truly believe in partnerships very strongly. And I think one of the beautiful parts, again, of my work on the ground with Syrian organizations was seeing them come together in partnership and respond together on the ground. And that grassroots work, how it came together, was great. But then I saw a lot of influence, I think, when international actors came in, that also started to break that up a little as organizations started to compete for funding. And unfortunately, that happens a lot. But at the same time, I will say some positive things, which is, I think even during my time on Syria and still today, I have seen a lot more global alliances of even large international organizations that now work together to respond in different ways in different crises. So if one organization has greater access in one crisis, then the other organizations will pool funds or apply for funds together to fund that organization in that particular response. And I think I see that happening a lot more, which is refreshing, and I think the right way to go about business. I don't think charities, organizations, activist organizations in particular, should ever be competing to respond. They should be collaborating to respond. And I couldn't agree more with Rahima's hashtag. I think, together we're stronger. I think that's everything an activist community should be about. It's a community. We have to work together. And that's the only way we reach that sort of critical mass to bring about change. If we're working separately, individually, it's a lot harder to make the change and have the impact that we need. We can't advocate as strongly to state actors either. We need to come together on opinions, on policy actions, and sometimes that means compromising our positions slightly in order for the betterment of the community that we're activists on behalf of. It's a very difficult thing to do, but I think we see the greatest change happen by working through that difficulty and coming together on something. So yeah, positive message.
And Ali, how have you seen, you're at the coalface of coordination in India a lot, yourself coordinating different actors to try and support the Rohingya community there. So what are your experiences of managing that coordination in terms of fundraising and action on the ground?
So I might have a different idea on the, fundraising on social media. So because Lameez has rightly mentioned that actually there are competitions on the social media crowdfundings and all. Any organization that might not be working rightly in the ground level, but they're working at the social media, or they're highlighting on the social media or crowdfunding level what is not actually in the ground. So in that case, who are funding, actually they are getting cheat. So on other case, grassroots organization or individual who are actually working, they have got an opportunity to highlight their own work, where earlier they used not to get platform when it comes to fundraising issues and all. So another point I'd like to highlight that we have experienced both the funding, social media crowdfunding, again, offline crowdfunding. What we have noticed, it is always the similar persons we have got response from, or at the both platform. It is like who have got interest in our work, they have donated us through social media platform as well as on the offline. So, and again, another thing is, from my personal experience, I have seen some people have really misused such platform, which is why many people are getting, their trust lost at the online campaigning of crowdfundings and all.
Yeah, and you've raised such important points that relate to kind of competition and the lucrativeness of the industry from a professional business perspective, as well as the very few, the minority that do want to cheat. It is a minority. Most people come into it and try and work with good incentives, but it raises the big issue of trust. It's fundamental to successful human rights advocacy, humanitarian work on the ground. It's trust, it's relationship building. These are key parts of effective activism and assistance. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the panel now. I've probably got about 5-10 minutes longer. So please, anyone, if you have any more questions, pop them in the Q&A or the chat box, and I will ask them to the panel. In the meantime, as we wait for anything else, I'd like to open it out to all of you for just a few final reflections on what more activists can do. I suppose we've talked a little bit about that already. What more can ordinary people do, actually, to try and help reduce these protection gaps and further human rights advocacy? And I suppose I'd like to hear from a perspective about research, if you've got any advice for someone like myself, who is an academic researcher, but also, more generally, those who want to help but might not be in an organisation yet.
I mean, I'm happy to answer. I was thinking about this initially, I think, Jessica, when you first invited us for the panel, in terms of like thinking forward and what we would say. I fully agree with something that Lamise mentioned earlier on about, we have the Rohingya issue, and there's lots of issues. The world is becoming more and more Islamophobic, of course, and so as a result, we have the Delhi riots, everything that's happening with Europe's reaction to closing borders to the Syrian community, the hostility and the feeding of populist agendas and fascism. We as activists and general folk across the world, researchers, thinkers, writers, artists, have to really be aware that yes, there are individual units of suffering in its silos, but what are the sort of the connections, and how do they connect, and how can we look at each issue from sort of the roots up, and how best to address each of the issues individually, but also as a collective spirit of suffering as well. So some of the things that the Uyghur community are facing in China are very similar to what the Rohingya faced 60 years ago, when they were being made to feel like the other. And so we need to look at that. We almost need to predict some of the genocidal regimes that might happen very soon. Kashmir, Sri Lanka, again. And so we need to be prepared. And I think that's one of the things that the activist community and academic community needs to be prepared for. Other things that I would say is, especially within my experience within the Rohingya community and this particular project that we have at Restless Beings, is to ensure that in every platform, just like today, we have members of the Rohingya community, that have a seat, that are able to say their stories, that have an agency. And it's not just a matter of tokenism, but they actually have an agency. Another thing that I would mention, and maybe Jessica, this might be useful, and I mentioned this earlier on, is how can we best place dignity at the center of everything that we do, be it how we train as international organizations like myself when I'm working on the ground and my team are on the ground working with the local responders, first responders, and the local capacity builders, i.e. the local community who have lived experience working with the Rohingya for 20, 30 years because the Rohingya fled into Bangladesh. How do we better collaborate? How do we ensure that the dignity packs that we give the Rohingya women, to get them through their periods every month, are they right for those women, on a micro level? Have they got the right things that the women are used to within their cultural and religious values? Other dignity packs, and other dignity approaches in terms of ensuring that we know what the Rohingya dignity, and for every community living in refugee camps, we understand what dignity means to them. There'll be differences, and it's constantly evolving. And finally, with every sort of issue, what I would also recommend is we need to kind of unpack the privileges that exist within the field of human rights at work. So the privileges could be that, from the global West, we write structures that we think are the best ways to respond to needs-based issues. How can we change them so that we can look at as the world is changing, you know, with issues of Black Lives Matters, police brutality, everything that happened this place right now with, you know, 12 million plus Punjabi farmers, you know, rioting outside Delhi because of the agricultural laws, Modi's lack of response, all of those things, how can we best respond, and how can we ensure in our response there isn't privilege and structural pillars of privilege, and how can we ensure that there is a genuine global reflection in how we approach the communities that we work with. And I think that is what I would say is bring back the humanism, look at global suffering as a united whole, and place dignity at the center of everything that we do, be it, you know, academic, be it activism. So that's what I would say in terms of going forward.
Excellent, thank you so much. So many things, so many positive things to move forward with. Ali, do you want to go next and point us in the right direction?
Yeah, I would really agree with Rahima. You know, actually, the solution to Rohingya crisis is within Rohingya and Myanmar. So what we have observed in many cases, the Rohingya are being made to feel like third party in their own crisis. So what has been decided for Rohingyas in most of the table without Rohingyas themselves. So still we don't know what the repatriation agreement between Bangladesh, UNHCR and Myanmar hold. As a Rohingya, I don't know. No, I don't know any other Rohingya who knows what it holds. So this is to be changed in every table where Rohingya's future is decided. Rohingya should be given a chance to speak themselves, and they should be given opportunity to decide for themselves what is good for them, what is not good for them. At the same time, you know, in this digital age, I'd like to highlight the issue of identity crisis that we are facing. So it is always, the solution always relies within the Myanmar for Rohingyas. But while we are facing this genocide, fleeing into other countries, taking refugees, without documentation, our people are facing severe effect, like they're not getting education. So where we are, you know, missing out entire generation into limbo, like it has been already 3 years since 2017, if we actually count. So Rohingya children are not been given, you know, opportunity to continue with their formal education. So if it continues for 5 years or 10 years, where we are heading, actually, the activists and organization and government who are actually empathetic to Rohingyas should really think on this issue. So if it goes for 10 years, then the child which has crossed the border while she was 5 years is at the age of 10 years without any formal education. So the entire all these years has, you know, fueled his mindset with nothing, then just into a limbo or mental depression. And women are not getting enough support to you know, support themselves, like Rahima mentioned about dignity products and all. So recently, you know, I have had opportunity to visit one of the detention just on 24th of November, where 14 people were being detained by the authority in West Bengal. So there I have realized, you know, before them, 4 people were already, you know, in the same detention. About them, nobody had any clue, including UNHCR and other agencies. Although they have ignored them. So this group of 4 persons include 3 minor girls with whom I had opportunity to speak, who have expressed that, you know, since July last year, they were being detained. And since then, they are in the detention with just one cloth that which they have fled from Bangladesh to India. You know, they don't have even access to undergarments, and and sanitation, proper sanitation products and all. So in fact, after talking to them, I personally had to go out to a mall and buy them, some such materials. So it is very saddening. One child who is just 15 years old, and she was detained last year July. She, at the end moment, while I was coming out from the meeting in the detention, she said, brother, it is like we're meeting an angel today. We have never met and spoke. We have never had an opportunity to speak with anyone, including our relatives, anywhere. I miss my family a lot. I don't know when I will be able to go out of this detention. Can you please help me with a photograph of my family? And that one request, where I felt so vulnerable and I couldn't trust their family, is still giving me nightmare. I am not able to properly sleep during night. So I feel myself helpless at this moment, where someone is expecting to not much, just a photograph of the family member. So at the same time, we have got children who have got out from the detention after years, but because of the lacking of their family members in India and lacking of the support from organizations, including agencies, they are stuck in where they cannot make any decision for themselves. In fact, where they try to approach for help, they get negative response. So this should be actually changed. Rohingya should be given opportunity to make their future throughout formal education system that is lacking in the community. And again, who are working with the Rohingya refugees, they must understand that working for Rohingyas will not really solve this crisis, as Rohima rightly mentioned. Working with the Rohingyas will empower themselves, and they will be able to take up their issues in a platform like this. I definitely would like to thank Jessica for helping me understand most of the human rights issue in a better way, for being one of the good mentor to my life. So I have got such person in my life, and there should be understanding among the activists who are working. It is actually the Rohingyas whom we should be empowering to take up their issues and to rightfully speak for themselves in the platform, and they should have an opportunity so that they don't lose their future.
Thank you, Ali. Such important and powerful points made. It fundamentally boils down to meaningful inclusion and participation, as you say, with dignity at the centre. Thank you so much. Lamise, would you like to end the panel by just offering a few reflective comments, and then we'll tie it to a close?
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to end on, to be honest. But I guess I'd zoom out a bit again. That seems to be my job on this panel. I think it's important for us to realize and reflect on the fact that, since the establishment of the idea of human rights and UNHCR, we've never lived in an ideal human rights environment. We've never fully tackled the issue and ensured a full and fair and just enforcement of human rights for all people across the globe. That everyone has equal access to everything, that everyone is, equal in front of the law. Like, I think that's always been a fight and continues to be so, right? So we aren't the first activists, and we will not be the last. And this is a chance for us to put in place a new step, you know, on the ladder, so that we can move a little bit further along in that fight. And everything that we do is really important in that long view picture, in terms of us making sure that, you know, we're working cogs in that wheel. But I guess what's important for me as well is, again, that connectedness, looking at the larger picture, making sure that we join up the dots, that we realize that yes, we're here talking about the Rohingya crisis, but that doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are a lot of global influences, you know, historically, currently, that add to that crisis, that form it as it is, and form the conversations that we are having at an international level, and why change doesn't happen. And again, I guess I want to put that global lens on it, that, you know, wherever we are from, you know, the idea of, you know, the Trump regime separating children from their mothers at the borders of Mexico, to you know, conflicts that are happening in Kar or in Ethiopia or in Western Sahara, or indeed what's happening with the Uyghurs in China, or, you know, in Kashmir, or what's happening in Sri Lanka, to places like Australia that have migrants sat in detention centers on islands, you know, out of sight, out of mind. Those people's rights are also not met, and I think it's very important for people like me, that's a, you know, Western perspective, to acknowledge that our governments are far from, you know, free of any blame, far from implementing just human rights mechanisms. And there's that, you know, we also need to look and make the connection of what's happening at home, not just what's happening elsewhere, and make sure that we are influencing policymakers here, because the decisions that we make here influence decisions that are made elsewhere. There is a global power dynamic that's at play. And we do hold a position of influence and a position of privilege, and it's important for us to use that privilege effectively. So it's important for us when people like Priti Patel make, you know, a decision to try and look at, you know, copying what Australia was doing in terms of having detention centres on islands, again, out of sight, out of mind, and we can enforce those as we will, that we counter that when we have human rights violations at detention centres here, and we don't look at migrants, or language is used around migrants, which is dehumanizing, that we counter that. And that is just as important as the work that we are doing in terms of supporting, you know, Rohingya brothers and sisters overseas, or whomever else we might be activists on behalf of. And I think it's important for us, particularly because I think in a post 9/11 war on terror language environment, there has been a global rise in Islamophobia. We have to acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge that that has been a real part of the changing dynamic globally on how language is used to erode the rights of human beings in different places across the globe, and how that language is really a key to, unfortunately, leading us down the rise of greater structural violence and unfortunately extreme manifestations such as genocide. And I think if we aren't acknowledging that, if we're not countering that, if we're not labeling it, whether it's in Hungary, in France, or indeed in the UK at an early stage as what it is, and just, you know, confronting it at the start, then we can't counter it later. You know, we don't want it to get too far down the line. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that and to do that, and to join the dots up. And I think that's where I would really leave it, is that from a human rights activist perspective, I think it's important that we do that globally, and we join up the dots and we work together to counter it and catch it early and make the difference where we can, so that we don't get to those stages that unfortunately a lot of our brethren are in. That's me.
Thank you so much, Lamise. That was a really great kind of summary and set of directions for us. And I think I will unfortunately have to bring the panel to a close now because we're out of time. But if I had to summarize all three of your points about how we move forward in a few words, it is the centrality of dignity, the importance of inclusion, and the priority of connectedness between different human rights issues, but also with each other as activists, as researchers, as humanitarian workers. I can't say a bigger thank you to Rahima, Lamiz, Ali for your time, for your insights, and for sharing your personal experiences as well as activists in the field. I have incredibly enjoyed this panel, and I look forward to future conversations with you all as things will get better. Let's end on a positive note. Thank you so much. Normally we'd have a big clap at the end because now we're online, exactly. We're not able to do that kind of human connection, but thank you so much. Bayaz, I shall hand over to you to close today's conference.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jessica Field, for moderating the last session of day 1. And our day 2 of the conference would start tomorrow sharp at 10 a.m. GMT. Please remember the link is not the same. You have to register again for day 2. I have shared the link here in the chat box. And I hope some of you will be present on day 2, that's tomorrow. We'll have 5 different and distinct type of sessions. The first one on some case studies from Bangladesh on violence and protection and host community perspective. The second session is on Rohingya activist perspective from Japan, Australia, and Canada. The third panel would be on International Court of Justice. The fourth is a little bit different. It would be a documentary and photographic exhibition from 2 artists, and the closing session would be delivered by Ms. Saida Muna Tasnim, the High Commissioner for Bangladesh in the UK. So that's in summary for tomorrow's conference, day 2, and thank you everyone. I really want to thank all the speakers, moderators, and attendees for day 1, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. So that's the close of day 1. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.